Wyoming Territory, 1885. The last light of day painted the vast Wyoming sky in hues of orange and pink as Yates Porter drove the final nail into the small wooden home. Sweat glistened on his brow despite the cooling evening air. At 25, he had already spent more years working cattle than most men twice his age, but this task had been different, personal. A promise kept to a town that had given him purpose when he had none. "Looks mighty fine, Yates," called Samuel Miller, the town mayor, as he approached on horseback. "Just in time, too. Word came by telegraph that the new schoolteacher arrives on tomorrow's stage." Yates nodded, stepping back to survey his handiwork, the simple yet sturdy one-room house built at the edge of Clearwater Springs. It wasn't grand, but it was solid, with proper glass windows and a stone fireplace that would keep its occupant warm through the harsh Wyoming winters. "Town appreciates what you've done," Samuel continued, dismounting. "No, it wasn't easy with all your ranch duties." "I gave my word," Yates said simply, replacing his hammer in his tool belt. "Besides, no teacher would stay if we put them up in that old storage room at the back of the schoolhouse again." Samuel chuckled. "True enough, last three didn't make it past winter." Yates ran a hand through his dark hair, remembering the string of teachers who had come and gone, mostly Eastern women unprepared for frontier life. The schoolhouse had sat empty since February, when Miss Holloway had packed her trunks after just 4 months, claiming the Wyoming Territory was unsuitable for civilized living. "This one's coming from Denver," Samuel offered. "Name's Miss Eliza Caldwell, fresh out of normal school according to her letters." Yates felt a familiar weariness. Another city girl who'd likely flee at the first blizzard or Indian scare. The children of Clearwater Springs needed stability, not another temporary figure passing through their lives. "Town council's hoping she'll be different," Samuel said, seemingly reading Yates' thoughts. "Guess we'll see tomorrow." As the mayor rode away, Yates gathered his tools. The soft weight of loneliness settled over him like an old familiar blanket. At 25, he'd built a respectable cattle operation, earned the town's trust, and constructed this schoolteacher's cottage with his own hands. Yet each night he returned to an empty ranch house, carrying the conviction that had served him since his parents' deaths in a Sioux raid when he was 16. The frontier was no place for attachment. Love was a luxury men like him couldn't afford, not when survival demanded everything you had. He mounted his paint horse and took one last look at the cottage. "Hope you're made of stronger stuff than the others, Miss Caldwell," he murmured before turning toward home. The long shadows of evening stretched across the open range as he rode. His ranch lay 5 miles outside town, close enough to be part of the community, but far enough to maintain the distance he'd always believed necessary. The quiet ride gave him time to reflect on the false hope that accompanied each new schoolteacher's arrival. It wasn't that he didn't want the town to have a proper school. The children deserved education, especially since the railroad had finally connected their small settlement to the wider world. But experience had taught Yates that people who didn't understand frontier life couldn't be counted on. They left when things got hard, just like his mother's sister, who had promised to care for him after his parents died, then abandoned him to the mercy of strangers when frontier life proved too difficult. Better to expect nothing, he'd learned. That way disappointment couldn't find you. As his ranch house came into view, Yates tried to take pride in what he'd built from nothing. Starting as a ranch hand at 16, he'd worked and saved until he could claim his own land at 20. Now, 5 years later, his YP-connected brand marked 300 head of cattle, and his horse breeding operation was gaining recognition beyond Wyoming. Yet something hollow remained at the center of his achievements, something the townspeople with their families and shared lives wouldn't understand. Success meant nothing without someone to share it with, a voice whispered in his mind. He silenced it immediately, as he always did. Success means survival, he reminded himself firmly, and that's enough. The stagecoach journey had been even more grueling than Eliza Caldwell had anticipated. At 21 years old, she had never traveled farther than the 100 miles from her family's modest Colorado farm to Denver for her teacher training. Now, after 3 days of relentless jolting over rutted trails, her entire body ached as though she'd been trampled by horses. The coach hit another hole, sending her petite frame bouncing against the wooden seat. She clutched her copy of McGuffey's Reader tighter, as though the teaching text might somehow anchor her to stability. "Nearly there, miss," the driver called down. "Clearwater Springs just beyond that ridge." Eliza attempted to smooth her travel-wrinkled blue dress and tuck stray strands of her long chestnut hair back into place. First impressions mattered, especially for a young unmarried woman arriving alone to teach in a frontier town. Her mother had warned her repeatedly about the importance of maintaining dignity and proper distance from the local population. "Remember who you are, Eliza," Margaret Caldwell had said as she'd helped pack her daughter's trunk. "You're there to educate their children, not to become one of them." But becoming one of them was precisely what Eliza secretly hoped for. The daughter of a failed businessman who'd retreated to farming out of necessity rather than choice, she'd grown up hearing her father lament their reduced circumstances. Her mother had insisted on maintaining the pretense of gentility despite their modest means, forbidding Eliza from the physical labor of farm life that might mark her as common. Teaching had been the compromise, respectable enough for her mother's aspirations yet practical enough to provide Eliza the independence she craved. And Wyoming, with its vast landscapes and promise of a society still forming itself, offered something Denver could not: the chance to reinvent herself completely. As the stagecoach crested the hill, Eliza caught her first glimpse of Clearwater Springs. The modest collection of wooden buildings nestled in a valley beside a creek couldn't have contained more than 300 souls. A church steeple rose above the other structures, and the schoolhouse was easily identifiable by its bell tower. Her heart quickened with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. "Lord, give me strength," she whispered. The teaching position had seemed so right when she'd applied. A chance to escape the stifling expectations of proper Colorado society and her mother's constant reminders that at 21 she was already in danger of spinsterhood. But looking at the tiny settlement, doubt crept in. Was she truly prepared for this frontier life? The stagecoach rattled down the hill and onto what passed for Clearwater Springs Main Street. Curious faces turned toward the approaching vehicle, women pausing in their errands, men stepping out from the general store, children running alongside the coach with excited shouts. When the coach finally lurched to a stop outside what appeared to be a combination hotel and saloon, Eliza took a deep breath. This moment would define her in the eyes of her new community. Gathering her courage, she waited for the driver to open the door. "Welcome to Clearwater Springs, Miss Caldwell," said a portly, bearded man who stepped forward as she emerged. "I'm Samuel Miller, town mayor." "We're mighty pleased you've made the journey safely." "Thank you, Mr. Miller," she replied, forcing confidence into her voice despite her exhaustion. "I'm eager to begin my duties." A small crowd had gathered, examining her with undisguised curiosity. Eliza stood as tall as her 5'3" frame would allow, meeting their gazes with what she hoped was appropriate friendliness. "This here's Mrs. Wilson, who runs our general store," the mayor continued, introducing a stern-faced woman in her 50s. "And Reverend Thomas, who's been filling in with the children's education these past months." Eliza nodded politely to each person introduced. The elderly Reverend looked particularly relieved at her arrival. "Those youngsters have run me ragged," he admitted with a chuckle. 26 pupils aged 5 to 16 all in one room. I'm better suited to Sunday sermons than arithmetic, I'm afraid." "I look forward to meeting them," Eliza said. A young boy of about 9 darted forward, staring up at her with frank assessment. "Are you going to leave before winter like the last one did?" "Timothy," Mrs. Wilson scolded, pulling the boy back. "Mind your manners." But Eliza appreciated the direct question. "I have no intention of leaving," she answered seriously, addressing the boy rather than the adults. "I've come to stay." The mayor cleared his throat. "Well then, let's get you settled. We've prepared appropriate accommodations this time, a proper cottage near the schoolhouse. The town council felt it would help ensure a more permanent teaching situation." As they spoke, Eliza noticed a tall figure observing from the doorway of the mercantile. Unlike the openly curious townspeople, this man maintained a careful distance, his expression unreadable beneath the brim of his Stetson. Something about his stance, confident yet detached, caught her attention, but before she could inquire about him, he turned and disappeared inside the store. "Your trunk can go directly to your new home," the mayor was saying. "Mrs. Wilson has prepared a welcome basket with essentials. School begins Monday, which gives you the weekend to settle in and review the class records." "That's very thoughtful," Eliza replied, feeling overwhelmed by the immediacy of it all. She had imagined at least a week to prepare, not just 2 days. As if sensing her unease, a kind-looking woman with graying hair stepped forward. "I'm Martha Davis, dear. I'll walk you to your cottage and help you get situated. My youngest is in your class, the only reason I still have a child in school at my age," she added with a laugh. "Late blessing, that one." Grateful for the offer, Eliza followed Mrs. Davis down the dusty street. The townspeople dispersed, returning to their activities but still watching her with undisguised interest. "Don't mind them staring," Martha said. "New faces are rare enough, but a young, pretty schoolteacher is cause for real excitement. The single men will be polishing their boots for Sunday service now." Eliza felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I've come to teach, not to find a husband." Martha's knowing smile suggested she'd heard such declarations before. "Of course, dear, but you should know there's already talk about who might court you. Frontier towns run on gossip as much as they do on cattle and crops." They walked past the schoolhouse, a simple wooden structure larger than Eliza had expected, and continued toward the edge of town. When they rounded a bend in the road, Martha pointed ahead. "There's your new home." Eliza stopped in her tracks, genuinely surprised. Instead of the crude shelter or room in someone's house she'd mentally prepared for, a charming cottage stood on a small rise overlooking both the town and the distant mountains. Though modest in size, it boasted a covered porch, glass windows, and even window boxes ready for planting. Smoke curled from a stone chimney, suggesting someone had prepared for her arrival by lighting a fire against the evening chill. "With beautiful," she managed, emotion unexpectedly tightening her throat. "Yates Porter built it," Martha said, watching her reaction with approval. "Finest carpenter in the county, though ranching's his true calling. The town provided materials, but he did all the work himself these past months." "Why would he do that?" Eliza asked, confused by such generosity toward someone unknown. Martha hesitated before answering. "Yates understands better than most what education means to children with limited opportunities. His own schooling ended abruptly when his parents were killed. The town's been trying to maintain a proper school for years, but we can't keep teachers. He figured proper housing might help." As they approached the cottage, Eliza noticed the careful craftsmanship, the perfectly fitted boards, the smooth porch railings, the door that hung straight and true. Someone had invested considerable care in creating this place. Inside, the cottage was simple but thoughtfully arranged. A cast-iron stove anchored one wall beside open shelves stocked with basic provisions. A small table with two chairs stood near the front window. A curtain partially separated the living area from a bedstead made up with a colorful quilt. Another corner held a copper bathtub currently serving as storage for firewood. "The town women took up a collection for furnishings," Martha explained, setting down the welcome basket. "We wanted you to have a proper start." Tears pricked Eliza's eyes at this unexpected welcome. In Denver, she'd been just another teaching student, unremarkable and easily overlooked. Here, people she'd never met had prepared a home for her. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "Say you'll stay longer than the others," Martha replied simply. "These children need consistency. They need someone who won't give up when winter comes or when the Cheyenne pass through on their way to hunting grounds." The seriousness of Martha's tone made Eliza realize what was truly being asked of her, not just to teach reading and figures, but to become part of the community's foundation. The responsibility was daunting. "I'll do my best," she promised. After Martha left, Eliza slowly circled the small space that was now her home, running her fingers over the smooth wooden surfaces and examining the details. Near the fireplace, she discovered a small bookshelf containing a Bible, several primers, and unexpectedly, a copy of Tennyson's poems. She opened the poetry volume, surprised to find an inscription on the flyleaf. "May words bring comfort when the prairie grows too vast. Y.P." The mysterious Yates Porter again. Eliza wondered what kind of man would build a house for a stranger and leave poetry as a welcome gift. Certainly not the rough, uncultured frontier type her mother had warned her about. As darkness fell, Eliza sat by the fire, planning lessons and trying to imagine the children she would meet. Yet her thoughts kept returning to the unknown craftsman who had created this sanctuary. What did he expect in return for such generosity, or was it truly the selfless act it appeared to be? She resolved to find this Yates Porter and properly thank him, after she'd proven herself capable of the task she'd come to perform. First impressions mattered, and she intended hers to be of competence rather than gratitude. Sunday morning dawned clear and cool, perfect weather for the first gathering of Clearwater Springs faithful since Eliza's arrival. She had spent Saturday organizing the schoolhouse, reviewing student records left by previous teachers, and preparing lessons. The work had kept her mind occupied, preventing homesickness from taking root. She dressed carefully in her best navy blue dress with its modest white collar and cuffs, arranging her chestnut hair in a simple but tidy bun at the nape of her neck. The looking glass reflected a young woman trying very hard to appear older and more experienced than her 21 years. "You can do this," she told her reflection. "You've trained for this." But no amount of training at Denver's normal school had prepared her for the scrutiny she faced as she walked into the small whitewashed church. Conversation halted momentarily as every head turned to observe the new schoolteacher. Reverend Thomas rescued her from the awkward silence, coming forward to escort her to a pew near the front. "So glad you could join us, Miss Caldwell. I've announced that school will commence tomorrow, and the children are quite excited." The service proceeded with familiar hymns and scripture readings. Eliza found comfort in the ritual, so similar to church services back home. When Reverend Thomas began his sermon on community and welcome, using the parable of the Good Samaritan, she felt multiple glances directed her way. She was concentrating so intently on appearing properly attentive that she almost missed the late arrival that caused a subtle stir among the congregation. A tall man slipped quietly into a pew at the back, nodding briefly to those who acknowledged him. Even from a distance, Eliza recognized him as the observer from the mercantile doorway yesterday. His features were clearer now, a strong jawline softened by unexpectedly gentle eyes, dark hair cut short but still showing a tendency to wave, and a lean build that suggested both strength and agility. Unlike many of the other men present, he wore no beard, though a day's stubble shadowed his jaw. "That's Yates Porter," whispered Martha Davis, who sat beside her. "Rarely makes it to service. Must have wanted to see our new addition to town." Eliza felt a flush of self-consciousness but resisted the urge to turn around again. So this was the man who had built her cottage. He appeared younger than she'd expected, not much older than 25, and considerably more handsome than the grizzled craftsman she'd imagined. After the service, the congregation lingered outside, clearly expecting Eliza to participate in the social aspect of church attendance. She steeled herself for the barrage of introductions, questions, and not-so-subtle assessments. True to Martha's prediction, several unmarried men made special efforts to welcome her, from the blacksmith's shy greeting to the bank clerk's somewhat pompous introduction. Eliza maintained the delicate balance between friendliness and professional distance she determined was appropriate. She was speaking with Mrs. Wilson about supplies for the school when she sensed someone approaching from behind. A respectful silence fell over the immediate group. "Miss Caldwell," came a deep voice, "welcome to Clearwater Springs." Turning, she found herself face to face with Yates Porter. Up close, his features were even more striking, hazel eyes that seemed to shift between green and brown depending on how the light hit them, set beneath straight brows that gave him a serious expression even when his mouth hinted at a smile, as it did now. "Mr. Porter," she acknowledged, extending her hand formally, "I believe I have you to thank for my accommodations." He accepted her handshake briefly, his calloused palm evidence of his work. "The town commissioned it," he corrected, an unexpected modesty in his tone. "I just provided the labor." "You provided considerably more than labor," she replied, "the bookshelf, the Tennyson. Those were thoughtful additions." Something flickered across his expression, surprise perhaps that she had noticed or mentioned these details. "Reading makes the winters pass easier," he said simply. Then, after a brief hesitation, "Is the cottage satisfactory?" "More than satisfactory," Eliza assured him. "It's perfect. I've never had a space so completely my own before." He nodded, seeming genuinely pleased by her approval. "If anything needs fixing, let me know. Wyoming winters find every weakness in construction." "I'll remember that." She studied him curiously, trying to reconcile this articulate, reserved man with Martha's description of a rancher who rarely attended church. "Will any of your children be attending school, Mr. Porter?" A shadow passed over his features. "I have no children, Miss Caldwell, no wife either. My interest in the school is community-minded." Before she could respond to this revelation, the mayor interrupted, eager to introduce Eliza to more townspeople. By the time she had a moment to look for Yates again, he had already departed, riding away on a striking paint horse. Throughout the remainder of the day, as she continued meeting her neighbors and future students' parents, Eliza found herself thinking about the contradictions embodied in Yates Porter. A solitary rancher who built a home for a stranger, a man who seemed uncomfortable in social settings yet left poetry as a welcome gift, someone invested in education yet apparently distant from community gatherings. When she returned to her cottage that evening, she saw it with new eyes, noting the precise craftsmanship in every corner. Whatever his reasons, Yates Porter had created something meaningful in this small house. Eliza felt a strange connection to this man she barely knew, a gratitude that went beyond the physical structure to the intent behind it. Curious, she murmured to herself, running her hand along the smooth wooden mantelpiece. Something about Yates Porter made her want to understand him better, a dangerous inclination for a young woman determined to establish herself as a serious educator rather than a frontier bride. Dismissing these thoughts, she turned her attention to final preparations for tomorrow's classes. Her future in Clearwater Springs would be determined by her success as a teacher, not by her interest in the town's most enigmatic bachelor. Monday morning brought 23 children of varying ages to the schoolhouse, their faces displaying emotions ranging from excitement to sullen resentment. Eliza stood at the door, greeting each one by name, having memorized the student roster. "Good morning, Timothy," she said to the forthright boy from her arrival. "And you must be Sophie," she continued to a tiny girl clutching a slate. By the time the bell rang, signaling the start of the school day, Eliza had established the first thread of connection with each child. Standing before them, she straightened her shoulders and smiled confidently. "Good morning, students. I am Miss Caldwell, and I am honored to be your teacher." For the next 6 hours, Eliza navigated the complexities of teaching multiple grade levels simultaneously. She set the older students to reviewing mathematical problems while she helped the youngest learn letters. She assigned reading passages to the middle group while demonstrating penmanship to others. The constant shifting between subjects and age groups left her dizzy but exhilarated. Most students responded well to her organized approach and genuine interest in their learning. A few tested boundaries, particularly 16-year-old James Wilson, who clearly believed himself too old for schooling, and 12-year-old Anna Davis, who questioned every instruction with suspicious defiance. By afternoon, Eliza had identified her greatest challenges and opportunities. When the final bell rang, she felt simultaneously exhausted and accomplished. The children filed out, several of the younger ones pausing to tell her they were glad she had come. As she gathered papers and cleaned the blackboard, she heard a knock at the open door. Looking up, she was startled to find Yates Porter standing there, hat in hand. "Mr. Porter," she said, quickly tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear, "what brings you to the schoolhouse?" "Brought some firewood," he replied, gesturing to a stack now visible on the schoolhouse porch. "Weather report says we might see early cold this year." "That's very thoughtful," she said, wondering why the successful rancher Martha had described would personally deliver firewood rather than sending a ranch hand. He shifted slightly as though uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Also thought you might need these," he added, producing a small package from his coat pocket. "Chalk is always in short supply. Ordered extra when I was in Cheyenne last month." Eliza accepted the package, their fingers brushing momentarily in the exchange. "You seem to have anticipated the school's needs before I even arrived." Something resembling a smile touched his lips. "Had 3 sisters before," he began, then stopped abruptly. "Teaching supplies were always running out at home." The unfinished sentence hung between them, hinting at loss. Eliza remembered Martha mentioning his parents' deaths but decided not to press. "How was your first day?" he asked, changing the subject. "Challenging but rewarding," she answered honestly. "Some students are years behind where they should be academically. Others show remarkable promise despite limited formal education." He nodded, leaning against the doorframe. "Frontier children learn different things first. Survival before poetry, counting cattle before algebra." "Yes, I'm realizing that," she admitted. "My training emphasized uniform progress through standardized lessons. I'll need to adapt considerably." "You'll figure it out," he said with unexpected confidence. "You've got the right instinct." "And what instinct is that, Mr. Porter?" His hazel eyes met hers directly. "You see them, really see each one. Watched you greeting them this morning from across the street. You called every child by name. Previous teachers didn't bother learning names until their second week, if they lasted that long." Eliza was surprised both by his observation and the fact that he had been watching. "Names matter," she said simply. "Especially to children who might feel invisible otherwise." Something shifted in Yates' expression, a flicker of recognition or perhaps memory. "More than most realize," he agreed quietly. An awkward silence fell between them until Eliza gestured to the papers on her desk. "I should finish organizing these before tomorrow." "Of course," he said, straightening and replacing his hat. Town council's asking about your intentions for a Christmas pageant. Apparently it's tradition, though we haven't had one in 2 years. A pageant, Eliza hadn't considered holiday preparations, still focused on establishing basic classroom procedures. I suppose it would be good for community morale. And for convincing folks you're planning to stay through winter, he added with unexpected directness. She met his gaze steadily. I said I was staying, Mr. Porter. I meant it. He studied her face as though searching for something, then nodded slightly. Good, children need consistency. With that, he turned to leave, pausing only to add, if you need anything, repairs, supplies, whatever, my ranch is the YP Connected, 5 miles north. Anyone can direct you. After he departed, Eliza found herself staring at the doorway, trying to decipher the contradictions that seemed to define Yates Porter. His gruff exterior barely concealed an unexpected thoughtfulness. His apparent self-sufficiency contrasted with his evident concern for the community's children. Most perplexing was his interest in her commitment to staying. While the town's investment in her cottage explained their concern, Yates' personal stake remained unclear. Was it merely community-mindedness, as he'd claimed yesterday, or something else entirely? Shaking her head, Eliza returned to organizing her lessons. Whatever Yates Porter's motivations, her focus needed to remain on proving herself as an educator. Speculation about enigmatic ranchers could only distract from that purpose. Yet as she walked home that evening, her gaze drifted northward toward distant hills where the YP Connected presumably lay. For the briefest moment, she wondered what Yates Porter's ranch house looked like and whether it contained bookshelves filled with unexpected poetry. Over the next 3 weeks, Eliza fell into the rhythm of frontier teaching. Each day brought new challenges, from breaking up fights between boys with long-standing family rivalries to convincing parents that girls needed arithmetic as much as sewing skills. Yet alongside these difficulties came moments of profound satisfaction when a struggling student suddenly grasped a concept, or when the entire class spontaneously engaged in discussion of a story she'd read aloud. The town gradually accepted her presence as something potentially permanent rather than temporary. Invitations to Sunday dinners increased. Mothers stopped by the schoolhouse with baked goods and thinly veiled assessments of her teaching methods. Fathers inquired about their children's progress with gruff concern that barely masked genuine interest in education. Throughout this period, Yates Porter maintained a curious pattern of distant observation and practical assistance. He never entered the schoolhouse during class hours, yet Eliza often noticed him watching from across the street when the children played outside during their midday break. Several times she arrived at the schoolhouse to find repairs completed overnight, a loose floorboard fixed, a broken window replaced, more firewood stacked neatly beside the door. She saw him at church each Sunday, always arriving late and leaving early, minimizing social interaction. Yet whenever their paths crossed directly, he inquired about specific students with surprising knowledge of their circumstances and challenges. "How's Timothy Wilson doing with his reading?" he asked one afternoon when they encountered each other outside the general store. "His mother mentioned he's struggling." "He's making progress," Eliza replied, surprised by his awareness of individual students' difficulties. "I've paired him with Sophie Jenkins during reading lessons. Her patience seems to help him." Yates nodded approvingly. "Good strategy. Timothy responds better to peer guidance than adult instruction, always has even as a toddler." These glimpses of personal knowledge about the town's children intrigued Eliza. Despite his apparent isolation at his distant ranch, Yates seemed intimately connected to the community's youngest members. As October progressed, bringing increasingly cold mornings and the first hints of winter, Eliza began preparations for the Christmas pageant Yates had mentioned. Such an event would require weeks of rehearsal alongside regular lessons, but she recognized its importance in demonstrating her commitment to the community. When she announced the pageant to her students, their excitement exceeded her expectations. Even sullen James Wilson showed interest when she mentioned they would need scenery built and props constructed. "We haven't had a Christmas show since Miss Holloway left," explained 10-year-old Sarah Miller, the mayor's daughter. "Pa says it's important for town spirit." "Then we shall make it exceptional," Eliza promised, "but we'll need help from parents and other community members." That evening, she drafted a notice requesting assistance with costumes, set construction, and music for the December 23rd performance. The following day, she posted it at the general store, where all important town announcements appeared. She was walking back to the schoolhouse when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Looking up, she saw Yates riding toward her on his paint horse, returning from some errand in town. He slowed as he reached her. "Miss Caldwell," he greeted, tipping his hat. "Mr. Porter," she returned with a nod. Something about his formal address always made her respond in kind, though she addressed most of the town by their first names now. "Saw your notice about the pageant," he said, falling into pace beside her, leading his horse. "Ambitious undertaking." "The children deserve a proper celebration," she replied. "Besides, I understand it's something of a tradition." "It was," he confirmed. "My mother directed the pageant for years before." He trailed off, that familiar hesitation whenever personal history arose. "Before she passed." The mention of his mother, the first personal detail he'd willingly shared, caught Eliza's attention. "You must have been in these pageants as a child then." A shadow of something that might have been a smile crossed his face. "Played a shepherd 4 years running. Never got promoted to wise man despite knowing everyone's lines." The image of a young Yates in a shepherd's costume made Eliza smile. "Perhaps you should volunteer your expertise for this year's production." "We could use someone with experience." He shook his head immediately. "Not much for public performances anymore." "But you'll attend?" she asked, surprised by how much his answer mattered to her. "Wouldn't miss it," he said simply. Then, changing the subject, "Winter's coming early. Cattle are growing heavy coats and the creek froze along the edges this morning. You prepared for Wyoming cold?" The abrupt shift was typical of their conversations. Any approach toward personal connections swiftly diverted to practical matters. "I believe so," she said. "The cottage stays remarkably warm with just a small fire." "Insulated the walls with extra batting between boards," he explained. "Makes a difference when temperatures drop below zero." They had reached the schoolhouse and Eliza paused at the steps. "You thought of everything, it seems." "Not everything," he admitted, his expression suddenly serious. "Just trying to give you a fair chance at staying. This town needs someone who won't give up when things get difficult." The intensity in his voice suggested personal investment beyond community interest. Eliza studied him curiously. "Why is the school so important to you specifically, Mr. Porter? You mentioned sisters but no children of your own." Yates looked away, his gaze fixing on the distant mountains. For a moment, Eliza thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice had softened. "Education is freedom, Miss Caldwell. Out here it's the difference between having choices and having none." He paused, then added more quietly, "I've seen what happens when that opportunity is lost." Before she could respond to this unexpected philosophical turn, the school bell rang, signaling afternoon classes would soon resume. Students began appearing from various directions, running toward the schoolhouse. "I should go," she said reluctantly, finding herself genuinely interested in continuing their conversation. He nodded, mounting his horse with fluid grace. "Need help with anything for the pageant, let me know. Might not perform, but I can build whatever scenery you need." As he rode away, Eliza realized their brief conversation had revealed more about Yates Porter than weeks of town gossip. Behind his reserved exterior and practical assistance lay a man with strong convictions about education's value, convictions apparently born from personal experience. That evening, as she planned the next day's lessons, Eliza found herself wondering again about the stories Yates didn't tell, about his parents, his sisters, and whatever circumstances had shaped his solitary existence. Despite his obvious capability and the respect he commanded in town, loneliness seemed to surround him like an invisible barrier. "Focus on your students," she reminded herself firmly. "Not on mysterious ranchers with sad eyes and unexpected kindness." Yet as she reviewed the Christmas pageant cast list, she found herself wondering which of her young shepherds might remind Yates of his younger self, and whether participating in this tradition might somehow bridge whatever distances he maintained from the community he clearly cared about. November arrived with the first substantial snowfall of the season, 6 inches that transformed Clearwater Springs overnight. Eliza awoke to a pristine white landscape and the realization that getting to the schoolhouse would be more challenging than usual. Bundling herself in her warmest coat, scarf, and gloves, she stepped out to find a path already shoveled from her door to the main road. Fresh boot prints in the newly fallen snow revealed her benefactor had completed this task not long before she awoke. The thoughtful gesture warmed her more than her woolen layers. Though no note identified the snow clearer, Eliza had little doubt about his identity. Yates Porter's silent assistance had become a pattern, present when needed, gone before thanks could be offered. At the schoolhouse, she found fewer students than usual, primarily those who lived in town. The outlying farms and ranches would likely keep their children home until paths became more passable. Eliza adjusted her lesson plans accordingly, combining age groups for story reading and focused arithmetic practice. Mid-morning, a disturbance outside drew their attention. Looking through frosted windows, Eliza saw a horse-drawn sleigh approaching, filled with bundled children. Recognizing an unexpected educational opportunity, she led her students outside to watch. Yates Porter handled the reins, his expression focused as he guided two powerful draft horses through the snow. Behind the sleigh, a second man rode horseback, one of Yates' ranch hands, judging by his attire. "Morning, Miss Caldwell," Yates called as he brought the sleigh to a stop. "Brought your missing students. Roads are passable by sleigh, not much else." 8 children tumbled out, cheeks red with cold and excitement from the unusual transportation. Eliza recognized them as the Davis children, the Carpenter twins, and others from the more distant homesteads. "Mr. Porter collected us all," announced 7-year-old Michael Carpenter. "Said learning don't stop for snow." "Learning doesn't stop for snow," Eliza corrected automatically, then smiled at Yates. "This is extraordinarily kind of you, Mr. Porter." He shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "Sleigh was just sitting in the barn, makes more sense to use it than have these youngsters miss school." To his ranch hand he called, "Jim, head back and check on the Miller place." Their boy never showed at the meeting point. As the ranch hand rode off, Yates turned back to Eliza. "I'll return at day's end to take them home. Weather's holding steady, but no sense risking a storm catching them." The children had already rushed inside, eager to warm themselves by the stove and share their sleigh ride adventure. Eliza lingered a moment longer. "You've gone to considerable trouble," she observed. "Not so much," he countered. "Ranch is quiet this time of year. Cattle are wintering in the south pasture." A small smile tugged at her lips. "You consistently minimize your generosity, Mr. Porter." Something flickered in his hazel eyes, discomfort perhaps, or surprise at being seen so clearly. "Just being practical," he insisted, gathering the reins. "Education's important." "So you've said," she replied. "Though I'm beginning to think there's more to your interest in these children's education than mere principle." He held her gaze for a moment longer than usual, something unspoken passing between them. Then he nodded briefly. "4 o'clock," he said, turning the sleigh. "I'll be back for them then." Throughout the day, Eliza found her thoughts returning to that moment of connection. In Yates' eyes, she glimpsed something beyond his usual reserve, a vulnerability quickly concealed but unmistakably present. When 4 o'clock arrived, bringing Yates and his sleigh as promised, Eliza had made a decision. As the children eagerly piled into the conveyance, she approached him with determined steps. "Mr. Porter, would you be willing to assist with our Christmas pageant preparations? Specifically, we need someone to construct the stable backdrop and manger. The children have designed it, but none of us possess the necessary carpentry skills." He hesitated, glancing at the expectant faces of the children. "I suppose I could manage that," he finally agreed. "When do you need it?" "We begin rehearsals next week," she explained. "Perhaps you could come by the schoolhouse Saturday afternoon. The children will be working on costumes with some of the mothers. You could review their designs then." She held her breath, half expecting him to offer to work alone rather than join their community effort. To her surprise, he nodded. "Saturday at 2, he confirmed. Then, with a slight tip of his hat, he flicked the reins and departed, the sleigh cutting a smooth path through the snow. Martha Davis, who had arrived to help walk her younger children home, observed this exchange with obvious interest. "Well now," she remarked as they watched the sleigh disappear down the street, "I haven't seen Yates Porter volunteer for a public gathering since the barn raising 3 years ago." Eliza tried to appear nonchalant. "He's merely helping with construction." Martha's knowing smile suggested she wasn't fooled. "That man has turned down requests from the mayor himself to join town committees, yet he agrees to build pageant scenery within seconds of you asking." She patted Eliza's arm. "Just something to consider, dear." "There's nothing to consider," Eliza protested, feeling warmth rise to her cheeks despite the cold. "Mr. Porter values education, that's all." "If you say so," Martha replied, unconvinced. "Though I haven't seen him offering to drive 8 children through snow to church services or committee meetings, just to your schoolhouse." As Eliza walked home through the gathering dusk, she reflected on Martha's observations. She had noticed Yates' particular attention to school matters but had attributed it to his stated belief in education's importance. The possibility that his interest might extend to the teacher herself was both unsettling and strangely exhilarating. "Nonsense," she murmured aloud, her breath forming clouds in the cold air. "He's being neighborly, nothing more." Yet she couldn't deny the flutter of anticipation she felt at the thought of Saturday's planning session. Whether from professional appreciation for his assistance or something more personal, Eliza found herself looking forward to seeing Yates Porter among the community he so often held at a distance. Saturday afternoon brought clear skies and milder temperatures. By 2 o'clock, the schoolhouse bustled with activity as mothers and children worked on costume preparations. Fabric scraps, thread, and pattern pieces covered every available surface, while excited chatter filled the usually orderly space. Eliza moved between groups, offering guidance and encouragement. She had just helped 10-year-old Sarah Miller adjust her angel wing pattern when the room suddenly quieted. Looking up, she saw Yates standing in the doorway, hat in hand, apparently unsure about entering the predominantly female gathering. "Mr. Porter," she called, crossing the room to greet him. "Thank you for coming." He nodded, his discomfort evident as every eye in the room turned toward him. "Said I would," he replied simply. "Children," Eliza addressed the group, "Mr. Porter has kindly offered to build our stable backdrop and manger. Let's show him the designs you've drawn." Timothy Wilson eagerly brought forward several crude but enthusiastic sketches, spreading them on a cleared table. Other children gathered around as Timothy explained their vision with animated gestures. To his credit, Yates gave the children his full attention, asking thoughtful questions about dimensions and suggesting practical modifications. His initial stiffness gradually eased as the conversation focused on technical matters rather than social niceties. "Could add some depth here," he suggested, pointing to the stable drawing. "Make it three-dimensional rather than flat. More realistic." The children responded enthusiastically to this idea, offering their own embellishments. Soon Yates was seated at the table, modifying their design with skilled pencil strokes while a cluster of fascinated students observed. Eliza watched this interaction with growing interest. The reserved man who minimized conversation with adults showed remarkable patience with children's questions and suggestions. He neither patronized their ideas nor dismissed their impractical additions outright, instead finding ways to incorporate their creativity into workable designs. "You're good with them," she commented when a lull in costume fittings allowed her to join his table. He glanced up, seeming surprised by the observation. "They're straightforward," he replied. "Say what they mean, ask what they want to know." "Unlike adults," she suggested, a corner of his mouth lifted slightly, "adults have agendas. Kids just want answers." The insight revealed more about Yates' perspective than perhaps he intended. His preference for children's company suddenly made more sense. They presented fewer social complications, fewer unspoken expectations. As the afternoon progressed, Eliza noticed something else. The mothers present treated Yates with a curious mixture of respect and caution. They clearly valued his assistance yet maintained a certain distance, as though unsure how to interact with him in this social context. Only Martha Davis approached him directly, bringing coffee and engaging him in conversation about the designs. Even then, Eliza detected a careful gentleness in Martha's manner, similar to how one might approach someone who had suffered a great loss. When the planning session concluded around 4 o'clock, Yates had produced detailed construction plans based on the children's concepts. He promised to begin work immediately, using lumber already available at his ranch. "Should have the framework ready by Wednesday," he told Eliza as they stepped outside together. "Could bring it then for the children to help paint." "That would be perfect," she replied. "They're eager to contribute to every aspect." He nodded, settling his hat back on his head. "Been meaning to ask, are you planning to include music? Traditional carols were always part of the pageant." "I had hoped to," Eliza admitted, "but I play piano only passably. The church organ is too cumbersome to move, and we have no other instruments available." Yates hesitated, seeming to debate something internally. Finally, he said, "I might have a solution for that. My mother's violin is still in good condition. Haven't played in years, but the fingering comes back quick enough." Eliza stared at him in genuine surprise. "You play the violin?" That rare almost smile appeared briefly. Surprised, the rough rancher knows music. Not at all, she replied honestly. Just surprised you'd offer, given your reluctance toward public performance. His expression grew more serious. Some traditions matter, he said simply. The music was always my mother's favorite part. In that moment, Eliza understood that Yates' offer represented something significant, a willingness to step beyond the boundaries he had established for himself, to reconnect with memories he usually kept carefully contained. We would be honored to have your music, she said softly. He nodded once, decisively. I'll bring the violin Wednesday, see if it still has a voice after all these years. As he walked toward his horse, Eliza called after him impulsively, Mr. Porter Yates, thank you, not just for the scenery or music, but for showing these children what community truly means. He paused, looking back at her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher, something between gratitude and caution. For a moment it seemed he might say more, but instead he simply tipped his hat in acknowledgement before mounting and riding away. Watching him go, Eliza realized that something had shifted between them. The formal distance they had maintained was gradually yielding to something warmer, something with dangerous potential for a young woman determined to establish herself as a respected teacher rather than a frontier bride. Miss Caldwell, came Martha's voice from behind her. Are you coming back inside? We still need to finish the angel costumes. Of course, Eliza replied, turning away from Yates' retreating figure. Let's see what we can accomplish before dark. But as she returned to costume preparations, Eliza found herself wondering what melodies might emerge from a violin that had been silent for years, and what other hidden depths might exist in the man who would play it. Wednesday afternoon arrived with anticipation hanging in the air like the scent of pine boughs Martha had brought to decorate the schoolhouse. Eliza had mentioned Yates' plan to bring both the stable framework and his violin, and word had spread quickly. By dismissal time, several mothers had appeared, ostensibly to assist with pageant preparations but clearly curious about this unexpected development. When Yates' wagon appeared outside, pulled by the same draft horses that had drawn the sleigh, the children rushed to the windows. It's huge, exclaimed Timothy, pointing to the wooden structure secured in the wagon bed. Eliza called for order, organizing the students into teams for different tasks. Some would help carry the lighter pieces inside, others would prepare the paint misses. Wilson had donated, and the youngest would work on decorations under Martha's supervision. Yates entered carrying a long wooden beam, followed by his ranch hand Jim bearing another. Behind them came several older boys, proudly assisting with smaller components. The men quickly established a work area at the back of the schoolhouse, and within an hour the basic stable structure took shape. The atmosphere was festive as children darted about with paintbrushes and decorations. Mothers spread protective cloths over desks and floors, while Eliza moved between groups, maintaining enough order to prevent chaos without dampening enthusiasm. Throughout this activity, she noticed Yates gradually relaxing. Though he spoke little, his body language shifted from its usual vigilant reserve to something more natural. When Timothy Wilson proudly showed him a painted star, Yates knelt to the boy's level to examine it with genuine interest. Fine work, he told the child. Steady hand you've got there. Timothy beamed at the praise. Pa says I'm too fidgety to ever do proper work, but Miss Caldwell says I just need to find the right task for my energy. Something darkened briefly in Yates' expression before he replied, Miss Caldwell's right. Different jobs need different kinds of energy. As the construction neared completion and paintings dried, Martha organized refreshments, coffee for adults and hot chocolate for children. The impromptu gathering had taken on the feel of a community celebration rather than a mere work session. During a quiet moment, as the children enjoyed their treats, Martha approached Eliza with a knowing smile. Haven't seen this much town participation in school activities since before the war, she observed, and I certainly never expected to find Yates Porter in the middle of it all. Eliza watched as Yates helped 8-year-old Sophie Jenkins hang her painted sheep cutout on the stable wall. He's been remarkably supportive of school activities. Of you mean, Martha corrected gently. The man built you a house, shovels your walkway before dawn, drives children through snow, and now constructs pageant scenery and offers to play music he hasn't touched in years. She patted Eliza's hand. Just saying, dear, that goes beyond civic duty. Before Eliza could formulate a response, Timothy Wilson's excited voice rang out across the room. Mr. Porter, you promised to play your fiddle. Can we hear it now? A hush fell over the gathering as all eyes turned to Yates. He stood very still for a moment, then nodded almost imperceptibly and walked to the corner where he'd left a worn leather case. The children gathered around as he opened it, revealing a honey-colored violin nestled in faded velvet. With careful hands, he lifted the instrument, examining it closely before tightening the bow. Might be a bit rough at first, he warned, positioning the violin under his chin with a familiarity that suggested the motion had once been second nature. Been some years. He drew the bow experimentally across the strings, making small adjustments until satisfied with the tuning. Then after a deep breath he began to play. The simple melody of Silent Night filled the schoolhouse. The notes emerged hesitantly at first, like someone testing unfamiliar ground, but gradually gained confidence. By the second verse the music flowed with surprising grace, filling the room with haunting beauty. Eliza watched, transfixed, as Yates' usual guarded expression transformed. With eyes half closed, he seemed to retreat into the music, or perhaps into memories associated with it. His fingers moved with increasing confidence across the strings, drawing forth a sound both melancholy and sweet. When the final note faded, silence held for several heartbeats before the children burst into applause. Yates appeared almost startled by the response, as though he had momentarily forgotten his audience. "That was beautiful," Eliza said, approaching him as the excited chatter resumed around them. "Truly beautiful." He lowered the violin, a conflicted expression crossing his features. "Mother taught me," he said quietly. "Said music matters most in hard places, brings beauty where it's needed." "She was wise," Eliza replied, "and you've kept her wisdom alive through your playing." Something vulnerable flickered in his eyes. "Haven't played since the raid. Couldn't bear to hear the songs she taught me." The simple admission, the first direct reference he'd made to the tragedy Martha had mentioned, caught Eliza unprepared. She understood instinctively that this moment represented a rare lowering of guards. "Yet you played today," she observed gently, "for these children." He looked around at the animated faces, then back to Eliza. "Some things are worth remembering even when it hurts," he said. Then with visible effort he shifted to more practical matters. "Should we try Joy to the World next, used to be part of the pageant finale?" Recognizing his need to retreat from emotional exposure, Eliza nodded. "Perfect. Children, shall we try singing while Mr. Porter plays?" The remainder of the afternoon passed in a blend of music and laughter, as Yates played carols and the children practiced singing. Eliza organized them by vocal range, creating a simple harmony that complemented the violin's melody. As daylight faded and parents began arriving to collect younger children, Eliza found herself standing beside Yates as he carefully returned the violin to its case. "Would you consider playing for the actual pageant?" she asked. "The music adds something essential." He secured the latches on the case before answering, "If you think it would help." "It would," she assured him. "Very much." He nodded, his usual reserve returning gradually. "Then I'll do it." As the last families departed and Martha helped collect remaining paint supplies, Yates lingered, apparently wanting to speak privately. When they finally had a moment alone, he said, "Been meaning to ask, will you be traveling home for Christmas after the pageant?" The question surprised her. "No, I'll remain here. My family is in Colorado, too far for a brief visit." Relief visibly crossed his features. "Good, I mean," he corrected himself hastily, "winters can make travel difficult." "Safer to stay." "I have no intention of leaving," she assured him, suspecting his concern went beyond weather conditions. "My home is here now." He studied her face, seeming to assess her sincerity. Most newcomers find the first winter hardest. Isolation, darkness, cold that seeps into bones. "Are you warning me or preparing me?" she asked with a small smile. "Both maybe." He glanced around the transformed schoolhouse with its festive decorations and newly constructed stable scene. "Community helps, makes winter bearable." The observation, coming from someone who deliberately maintained distance from that same community, carried particular significance. Eliza wondered if Yates recognized the contradiction. "Will you join us for Christmas dinner at the church?" she asked impulsively. "Martha mentioned it's a town tradition." He shook his head immediately. "Haven't attended in years. Usually check cattle lines that day. Even on Christmas." "Wolves don't observe holidays," he replied with attempted lightness. "Neither do ranchers." Eliza wanted to press further but sensed his withdrawal. The vulnerability displayed during his music had receded, replaced by his customary self-sufficiency. She recognized the pattern now, moments of connection quickly followed by retreat. "Well, the invitation stands," she said simply. "You'd be welcome." He nodded acknowledgement, gathered his tools, and bid her good night. As he departed, violin case tucked securely under his arm, Eliza felt a curious mixture of progress and frustration. The man who could create such beautiful music and show such patience with children still held himself apart from the community he quietly served. More intriguing still was her own growing investment in breaching those carefully maintained boundaries. Eliza had come to Wyoming determined to establish herself as an educator, not to become entangled in a rancher's complicated emotional landscape. Yet increasingly, she found herself drawn to the mystery of Yates Porter and to the glimpses of warmth that occasionally emerged from behind his guarded exterior. "Dangerous ground," she murmured to herself as she extinguished the schoolhouse lamps. Professional detachment was essential for a young, unmarried teacher in a frontier town. Becoming personally involved with any local bachelor would undermine the reputation she was working to establish. Yet as she walked home through the crisp evening air, the haunting notes of Silent Night played in her memory. The man who could draw such beauty from strings long silent was more than the solitary rancher he presented to the world. That realization, once acknowledged, proved impossible to dismiss. December brought increasingly harsh weather as winter settled fully across Wyoming. Heavy snowfall alternated with bitter cold, making travel between outlying ranches and town increasingly difficult. Despite these challenges, Eliza maintained regular school sessions, grateful for the consistent attendance of town children even when those from more distant homesteads couldn't safely make the journey. Preparations for the Christmas pageant continued steadily. 3 times weekly, Yates arrived after school hours to accompany their rehearsals with his violin. His playing grew more confident with each session, though he remained reluctant to participate in other aspects of the production. "Just the music," he insisted when Eliza suggested he might help direct the children's movements on stage. "I'm no actor." She didn't press the issue, recognizing that his musical participation already represented a significant step beyond his usual boundaries. Instead, she focused on helping him feel comfortable within the school community, gradually integrating him into conversations with parents who came to observe rehearsals. 2 weeks before Christmas, as a particularly severe storm approached, Eliza dismissed school early to ensure everyone reached home safely before the worst weather arrived. She had just finished securing the schoolhouse windows when Yates appeared at the door, snow dusting his shoulders and hat. "Storm's coming faster than expected," he said without preamble. "Need to get you home before it hits full force." "I can manage," she replied, gathering her books and shawl. "It's not far." He shook his head firmly, winds picking up, temperature dropping. "Not safe even for short distances." The concern in his voice persuaded her not to argue. Outside, she found his horse waiting, steam rising from its nostrils in the frigid air. "Where's your wagon?" she asked, suddenly realizing the logistics of his offer. "Too slow in deep snow," he explained, extending his hand. "Horse is surer." Eliza hesitated only briefly before allowing him to help her mount, settling sideways on the saddle while he swung up behind her. The unexpected proximity sent heat rising to her cheeks despite the biting cold. They rode in silence, Yates' arms reaching around her to handle the reins, his body providing welcome warmth against the strengthening wind. Snow began falling more heavily, reducing visibility to a few yards ahead. "Weather turns fast here," he commented, his voice close to her ear. "1 hour clear, next hour blizzard." "I'm learning that Wyoming demands respect," she replied, trying to maintain normal conversation despite their unusually intimate position. "Smart observation," he approved. "People who don't respect these elements don't survive them long." They reached her cottage quickly. Yates dismounted first, then lifted her down with strong hands at her waist. The brief contact, though practical rather than personal, left Eliza momentarily flustered. "Should check your firewood supply," he said, apparently oblivious to her reaction. "Storm might last days." She unlocked the door, inviting him in from the intensifying weather. Inside, he moved with surprising familiarity to the woodbox, assessing its contents with a critical eye. "Not enough if the cold holds," he decided. "I'll bring more from the stack out back." Before she could object, he had disappeared outside. Through the window, Eliza watched as he trudged through already deepening snow to the woodpile he had established months earlier. He returned several times, arms laden with split logs until the woodbox overflowed. That should last, he said, finally brushing snow from his coat. Enough for 3 days at least. Thank you, she said, pouring coffee into a cup and offering it to him. Please warm yourself before heading back out. He accepted the cup with a grateful nod, removing his gloves but keeping his coat on, a silent indication he wouldn't stay long. Standing before the fire, he sipped the hot liquid while surveying the cottage interior. Eliza followed his gaze, suddenly seeing her home through his eyes, the books neatly arranged on the shelves he'd built, the student papers stacked on the small table, the colorful quilt now supplemented with additional blankets against the cold. Evidence of permanent residence rather than temporary accommodation. You've made it your own, he observed quietly. Yes, she agreed. It feels like home now. Something in his expression softened. Good. That was the intention. When you built it, she ventured, did you truly believe the next teacher would stay? He considered the question, warming his hands around the coffee cup. Hoped rather than believed, he finally answered. Town needed stability for the children. And now, she asked, do you believe I'll stay? His hazel eyes met hers directly. Beginning to, he admitted. You've weathered more than most city-trained teachers already. Handled difficult parents, merged curriculum with practical skills, respected local ways while maintaining standards. He paused. And you genuinely care about the children. Not just their penmanship or arithmetic, but them. The assessment delivered in his straightforward manner warmed her more than the fire. They're remarkable young people, she said simply. Worth investing in. He nodded agreement, finishing his coffee and returning the cup. Should get back before visibility worsens, he said, moving toward the door. Ranch hands will be securing the herd in the South Pasture shelters. Will you be safe traveling in this? Eliza asked, sudden concern replacing her earlier self-consciousness. Know this land blindfolded, he assured her. Horse knows the way home too. At the door, he hesitated. If the storm lasts through weekend, we'll need to cancel Sunday's rehearsal. Can't risk bringing children out in dangerous conditions. Of course, she agreed. Safety comes first. He studied her face for a moment longer than necessary, as though memorizing its features. Stay warm, Miss Caldwell, he said finally. Don't venture out until storm passes completely, not just during lulls. Wyoming blizzards are deceptive that way. I'll be careful, she promised. And Yates, the use of his first name was deliberate, a small breach of the formality they usually maintained. Thank you for looking after me. Something flickered across his expression, surprise perhaps, or something deeper. Get used to looking after folks out here, he said, his tone deliberately casual. Part of frontier life. With that he was gone, a dark figure quickly swallowed by swirling white as the storm intensified. Eliza stood watching until he disappeared completely, then secured the door against the growing gale. As predicted, the blizzard lasted 3 days, confining Eliza to her cottage except for brief excursions to bring in more firewood. She occupied herself with lesson plans and pageant preparations, grateful for Yates' foresight regarding supplies. When the storm finally abated, leaving clear blue skies and towering snowdrifts in its wake, Eliza emerged to find paths already cleared from her door to the main road. Fresh tracks suggested the work had been completed within the hour. Looking northward toward the distant YP-connected ranch, she wondered about the man who consistently provided for her safety while maintaining careful distance from her gratitude. The contradiction fascinated her increasingly, as did Yates Porter himself. Dangerous ground indeed, she murmured, turning toward town to check on her students and the condition of the schoolhouse after the storm. With 10 days remaining until the Christmas pageant, rehearsals intensified as the children mastered their lines and blocking. Yates attended faithfully, his violin playing now an integral part of the production. Though he still declined deeper involvement, Eliza noticed him occasionally offering quiet suggestions to struggling students when he thought no one was watching. After one particularly productive rehearsal, as parents collected their children and the schoolhouse emptied, Eliza found herself alone with Yates as he carefully packed his violin. The music truly transforms the performance, she told him, organizing sheet music at her desk. You've given these children a gift they'll remember long after Christmas passes. He secured the violin case before responding. They're giving something back, he said quietly. Didn't expect that. What do you mean? He seemed to consider his words carefully. Playing again opens doors I kept locked. Not always comfortable, but maybe necessary. The admission, offered in his typically understated manner, suggested personal growth Eliza hadn't anticipated. Healing often feels that way, she observed. Uncomfortable yet necessary. He nodded slowly. Been avoiding Christmas traditions since my parents died, seemed easier than facing memories. His gaze moved to the pageant scenery, the children's painted decorations, the festive greenery adorning the schoolhouse. Maybe that was a mistake. It's never too late to reconnect with what matters, Eliza said gently. Their eyes met, and for a moment something unguarded passed between them, recognition, perhaps, of parallel journeys. Eliza had come to Wyoming partly to escape the constraints of her past, while Yates had withdrawn from traditions that triggered painful memories. Both were cautiously finding their way back to community, albeit through different paths. The moment ended when Martha Davis bustled in, carrying additional costume materials. Yates immediately retreated to his customary reserve, bidding them good evening and departing with his violin. "That man watches you when you're not looking," Martha commented once he was gone, "has done since you arrived." Eliza busied herself with arranging desks, hoping her flushed cheeks weren't obvious. "Mr. Porter watches everything. It's how he's survived out here." "Not the same way," Martha insisted. "He observes others with assessment. He watches with something closer to wonder." "Martha, really," Eliza protested. "You're imagining romantic entanglements where only professional respect exists." The older woman smiled knowingly. "Maybe so. But I've known Yates Porter since he was 16, appearing at our door half dead after the raid that killed his family. Watched him build walls around himself year by year. Now I'm watching those same walls develop doorways whenever you're near." This revelation about Yates' past startled Eliza. "Your family took him in." Martha nodded, sorting costume pieces as she spoke. "For a time. Thomas, my husband, taught him ranching basics. Boy was determined to stand on his own, though, worked himself nearly to collapse saving for his own land." "He never speaks of his past," Eliza said carefully, hungry for understanding yet reluctant to pry. "Wouldn't expect him to," Martha replied. "Trauma like that marks a soul. Sioux raid caught their homestead at dawn, parents killed outright, 3 younger sisters taken." She shook her head sadly. "Yates was 15, out checking fence lines. Returned to find destruction. Tracked the war party alone for 2 days before soldiers intercepted him." Eliza's hand went instinctively to her heart. "His sisters, were they?" "Never found," Martha answered quietly. "Presumed dead eventually. Yates spent 2 years searching whenever he could get away from work, nearly killed himself doing it, finally accepted they were gone." The story illuminated so much about Yates' character, his self-reliance, his distance from community celebration, his unexpected connection with the town's children. Eliza thought of his careful attention to the schoolhouse, his insistence on education's importance, his reluctant return to Christmas traditions through the pageant. "He's protecting himself," she murmured, half to herself. Martha nodded. "Loving people and losing them shaped him, decided early that avoiding attachment was safer." She paused in her sorting. "That's why his interest in you is significant, Eliza. He doesn't reach out, ever. Yet he built you a home before he'd even met you." "For the school," Eliza corrected, "for the children." "Tell yourself that if it makes you more comfortable," Martha replied with a knowing smile. "But I've witnessed that man decline dinner invitations for a decade. Yet he comes faithfully to pageant rehearsals where a certain schoolteacher directs children singing off-key carols." Eliza had no ready response. Martha's revelations had recontextualized every interaction with Yates, casting his actions in a more personal light than she had allowed herself to consider. "I came here to establish myself professionally," she finally said. "Romantic entanglements would undermine that purpose." Martha gathered her sewing basket, preparing to leave. "Purpose has a way of shifting when the heart recognizes what it truly needs," she observed. "You came seeking independence. Perhaps what you'll find is partnership instead." After Martha's departure, Eliza remained in the schoolhouse, her thoughts tumultuous. The story of Yates' past explained so much: his vigilance, his solitude, his connection to the community's children despite his personal isolation. Understanding deepened her compassion but also complicated her feelings. She had maintained professional distance partly from genuine commitment to her role as teacher and partly from fear that personal attachment would derail her hard-won independence. Now Martha's observations forced her to confront a different possibility. that true independence might include the freedom to form meaningful connections, even in unexpected places. As she finally gathered her things to leave, Eliza's gaze fell on the Christmas pageant scenery Yates had built, practical yet beautiful, like the cottage he had constructed for her. Both represented investment beyond mere duty, she now realized. Both suggested belief in something permanent. The revelation was both exhilarating and terrifying. If Martha was right about Yates' feelings, Eliza would soon face choices she hadn't anticipated when accepting this position. Choices about her future, her heart, and whether safety lay in professional isolation or in risking connection with a man who understood all too well the cost of loving and losing. The final days before the Christmas pageant passed in a whirl of activity. School sessions continued in the mornings, with rehearsals occupying afternoons. The entire town seemed caught up in preparations, contributing costumes, refreshments, and decorations for what had become a community celebration rather than merely a school event. Yates maintained his commitment to providing music, attending every rehearsal despite increasingly harsh weather. Eliza noticed subtle changes in his interactions. He spoke more freely with parents, accepted Martha's invitations to stay for refreshments after rehearsals, and occasionally shared quiet observations about individual children's progress. These shifts might have seemed insignificant to casual observers, but knowing what she now did about his past, Eliza recognized them as meaningful steps toward reconnection with the community. Whether Martha's assertions about his personal interest in her were accurate remained unclear, as he maintained careful propriety in their direct interactions. 2 days before the pageant, as they worked together arranging the schoolhouse for final dress rehearsals, Eliza decided to acknowledge what Martha had shared. "Martha told me about your family," she said quietly, when a moment of privacy presented itself. "I'm deeply sorry for your loss." Yates stiffened visibly, his hands pausing in their adjustment of a scenery panel. For a moment she feared he would retreat entirely, but instead he nodded once, accepting her words. "Was a lifetime ago," he said finally, "shaped everything after, though." "I can imagine," she replied, though in truth she could scarcely comprehend such trauma. "It explains your commitment to the school and these children." He studied her face, perhaps assessing her intent. "Education was important to my parents," he said after a pause. "Mother taught us at home before the settlement had a proper school, believed knowledge was the one thing that couldn't be taken away." A shadow crossed his features. Turned out she was wrong about that, too. The bitterness in his tone revealed wounds still tender despite the passing years. Eliza stepped closer, instinctively wanting to offer comfort but uncertain how. "What your mother gave you has lived on," she said gently. "In your music, in your support for these children's education, that knowledge wasn't taken, just transformed." Something shifted in his expression, surprise perhaps at this perspective. "Never thought of it that way," he admitted. "It's easier to see patterns in others' lives than our own," she offered. "As a teacher, I notice how experiences shape my students, even when they don't recognize the connections themselves." He considered this, his natural thoughtfulness evident in his measured response. "Suppose that's true, still, some lessons are harder earned than others." "The most valuable ones usually are," she agreed. A comfortable silence fell between them, different from their usual cautious distance. Yates resumed adjusting the scenery, but something had changed, a barrier lowered perhaps, or a mutual understanding reached. "Thank you," he said finally, "for not treating the story like gossip. Or worse, like something that needs fixing." "Some experiences can't be fixed," Eliza replied. "Only acknowledged and carried with dignity. You've done that." He met her gaze directly, something vulnerable and grateful in his eyes. Before he could respond, however, children began arriving for the final rehearsal, their excited voices breaking the moment of connection. Throughout the rehearsal, Eliza was acutely aware of Yates watching her when his attention wasn't required for playing. Once catching his eye across the room, she offered a small smile that he hesitantly returned, a simple exchange that somehow felt momentous. When rehearsal concluded, parents gathered their exhausted but excited children while Martha supervised final costume adjustments. Yates lingered, apparently waiting for a private moment. "Walk you home," he offered when they finally had a moment alone. "Getting dark early these days." The request, the first time he had suggested such a thing without practical justification like a storm approaching, seemed significant. "Thank you," Eliza accepted. "I'd appreciate the company." They walked in companionable silence through the crisp evening air, their breath forming clouds in the cold. Christmas decorations adorned most homes now, and lamplight glowed warmly through windows. The transformation of Clearwater Springs from the dusty frontier town of Eliza's arrival to this festive community still amazed her. "Town looks different with you here," Yates commented, seeming to follow her thoughts. "More hopeful somehow." "That's kind, but I suspect the Christmas season deserves more credit than I do," she replied. He shook his head slightly. "Been 6 Christmas seasons since I bothered noticing decorations or carols." "Difference isn't the season. It's your influence." The simple observation, delivered in his straightforward manner, touched Eliza deeply. "Perhaps we've influenced each other," she suggested. "I might not have adapted to frontier life so readily without your assistance." "Would have managed," he said with certainty. "You have that quality." "What quality?" "Determination," he answered immediately. "Saw it the day you arrived. Same look my mother had when facing challenges. Same look my sisters." He trailed off, the mention of his sisters still evidently difficult despite the years past. They had reached her cottage, but neither moved immediately toward the door. Instead, they stood in the gathering darkness, their conversation having reached depths neither had anticipated. "Will you come to the Christmas dinner after the pageant?" Eliza asked, returning to a previous invitation he had declined. "The children would love having you there. I would too," she added, the admission slipping out before she could consider its implications. Yates studied her face in the fading light. "Been avoiding Christmas properly observed for a long time," he said slowly. "Easier to work through it, pretend it's just another day." "I understand," she assured him. "But perhaps this year could be different." He didn't answer immediately, seeming to weigh decades of habit against new possibilities. "I'll consider it," he finally said. "Can promise that much at least." Even this tentative response represented progress. Eliza nodded, accepting his answer without pressing further. "That's all anyone can ask." As they reached her door, an awkward moment arose, the natural conclusion of their walk suggesting a farewell more personal than their usual parting, yet both hesitant to breach established boundaries. Yates solved the dilemma by taking her hand briefly, the gesture both formal and intimate simultaneously. "Thank you," he said simply, "for understanding without requiring explanations." The touch of his hand, warm despite the cold evening, sent an unexpected wave of awareness through Eliza. "Thank you for trusting me with your story," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. He released her hand and stepped back, restoring proper distance. "Should get back to the ranch, early start tomorrow." "Of course, good night, Yates." "Good night, Eliza." The use of her first name, the first time he had addressed her so, lingered in the air between them as he turned to leave. Watching him walk away, Eliza acknowledged what she had been trying to deny for weeks. Her feelings for Yates Porter had evolved far beyond professional appreciation or even friendship. The realization both thrilled and terrified her. She had come to Wyoming seeking independence and professional fulfillment. Emotional entanglement with a man, particularly one carrying such profound wounds from his past, had never been part of her plan. Yet as she entered her cottage, the home he had built with such care, Eliza couldn't help wondering if some journeys naturally led to destinations never initially considered. Perhaps true independence included the freedom to form connections based on mutual respect and understanding rather than social expectation or convenience. Whatever developed between them, she realized, would require patience and care, qualities Yates Porter had demonstrated consistently since her arrival. If Martha was right about his feelings, he would approach any deepening relationship with the same thoughtful consideration he applied to everything else in his life. "One day at a time," Eliza murmured to herself as she prepared for bed. Tomorrow would bring the final pageant rehearsal, and the day after, the performance itself. Those immediate responsibilities demanded her attention more than speculations about what might develop between herself and the reserved rancher who was gradually finding his way back to community through music and shared purpose. Yet as she drifted toward sleep, the memory of his hand holding hers remained, a warmth that suggested possibilities beyond anything she had imagined when accepting the position as Clearwater Springs schoolteacher. The morning of the Christmas pageant dawned clear and cold, with fresh snow blanketing the landscape. By mid-afternoon, excitement permeated the schoolhouse as children arrived in their costumes, parents helped with last-minute adjustments, and townspeople filled every available bench and chair. Eliza moved among her students, calming nerves and reviewing final directions. She had just finished adjusting 5-year-old Annie Miller's angel wings when Martha approached, eyes twinkling with suppressed excitement. "Look who's arrived," she whispered, gesturing discreetly toward the door. Eliza turned to see Yates entering, but not as she had expected. Instead of his usual practical attire, he wore a formal suit, complete with vest and polished boots. His dark hair was neatly combed, and he had shaved that morning, his jaw smooth and defined. The transformation was remarkable, the capable rancher replaced by a gentleman any Eastern drawing room would welcome. More surprising still was what accompanied him. Rather than simply bringing his violin, Yates escorted an elderly woman Eliza had never seen before, offering his arm as she navigated the crowded schoolhouse with a cane. "Mrs. Henderson," Martha explained, following Eliza's gaze. "Taught music here before the war, lives with her daughter's family outside town now, hardly ever comes to public gatherings anymore, health too fragile." As they watched, Yates settled Mrs. Henderson carefully in a chair reserved for special guests, ensuring she had a clear view of the performance area. The old woman patted his cheek with obvious affection before he stepped away to prepare his violin. "He was her star pupil years ago," Martha continued, "before the raid. She taught him violin originally, before his mother continued his lessons." The revelation added another layer to Eliza's understanding of Yates' musical background, and made his decision to play for the pageant even more significant. He wasn't merely revisiting a family tradition but reconnecting with multiple aspects of his past. When he approached Eliza moments later, violin in hand, she couldn't help commenting on his formal appearance. "You look quite distinguished, Mr. Porter," she said, deliberately returning to the formal address that seemed appropriate given his transformation. A hint of self-consciousness crossed his features. "Suit's seen better days," he replied. "But Mother always insisted Christmas performances deserved proper attire." "She was right," Eliza assured him. "The children will remember this day vividly. Your appearance honors the occasion." He nodded, glancing toward Mrs. Henderson. "Brought my first teacher, thought she might enjoy seeing traditions continue." The thoughtfulness of this gesture, bringing an elderly former teacher to a school event, touched Eliza deeply. Before she could respond, however, Reverend Thomas approached the front of the room, signaling the performance would soon begin. "Places, everyone," Eliza called, gathering her students. To Yates, she added quickly, "Thank you for everything you've contributed to this day. It means more than I can express." Something warm flickered in his eyes, acknowledgement of meanings beyond words. Then he moved to his designated position, raising his violin as the schoolhouse quieted in anticipation. The pageant unfolded beautifully. Children performed their parts with enthusiasm, if not always perfect execution. Timothy Wilson delivered his shepherd's lines flawlessly, while Sophie Jenkins made a serene Mary despite her occasional fidgeting. When the youngest students processed as angels, singing with more energy than accuracy, appreciative laughter rippled through the audience. Throughout it all, Yates' violin provided the emotional foundation, his playing more confident and expressive than during any rehearsal. When the final carol concluded, with all children and many parents joining in Joy to the World, Eliza noticed tears glistening in Mrs. Henderson's eyes and unexpectedly in Yates as well, though he quickly blinked them away. The audience's enthusiastic applause confirmed the pageant's success. Children beamed with pride as parents offered congratulations. Reverend Thomas delivered a brief Christmas blessing before inviting everyone to the church for the community dinner to follow. As the schoolhouse gradually emptied, families making their way through the snow-covered street to the church, Eliza found herself momentarily alone with Yates, who was carefully packing his violin. "You played beautifully," she told him. "The music truly made the performance special." "Children did well," he replied. "You prepared them thoroughly." "Will you join us for dinner?" she asked, returning to the invitation he had considered but not accepted. "Everyone would welcome you." He hesitated, his internal debate visible in his expression. "Mrs. Henderson expects me to escort her," he finally said. "Would be difficult to refuse now." Eliza smiled, recognizing this for the face-saving compromise it was, allowing him to attend while attributing the decision to obligation rather than personal choice. "Then we'll see you there," she said simply. The church hall had been transformed for the occasion, decorated with evergreen boughs, red ribbons, and candles that bathed the space in warm golden light. Long tables offered an abundance of food, contributions from every family ensuring variety beyond what any individual household could provide. Children darted between tables while adults shared conversation and laughter, the usual social boundaries temporarily relaxed in the spirit of celebration. Eliza circulated among her students' families, accepting congratulations and engaging in conversations that gradually shifted from the pageant to her plans for the school's spring term. She noticed Yates enter with Mrs. Henderson settling the elderly woman at a table before bringing her a plate of food. Though he maintained his customary reserve, he didn't immediately retreat to the periphery as she had half expected. Instead, he responded to greetings, accepted compliments on his music, and even engaged in brief conversations with townspeople who approached him. When Martha joined Eliza, she nodded toward Yates with undisguised satisfaction. "Would you look at that?" she murmured. "Man's attended exactly 2 community gatherings in the past decade. Now he's at his second in one day." "Mrs. Henderson's presence gives him purpose," Eliza observed. "Makes it easier to participate." Martha replied skeptically. "Mrs. Henderson's presence gives him an excuse. Someone else entirely gives him purpose." Before Eliza could respond to this pointed observation, Mayor Miller called for attention, tapping a glass to quiet the gathering. "Before we continue our feast," he announced, "the town council wishes to express particular gratitude to 2 individuals who made today's celebration possible." He gestured toward Eliza. "First, to Miss Caldwell, whose dedication to our children extends beyond regular lessons to reviving traditions many feared lost." Appreciative applause followed this acknowledgement. Eliza nodded graciously, though she felt her cheeks warm at being the center of attention. "And second," the mayor continued, "to Yates Porter, whose craftsmanship created the pageant scenery and whose musical talent reminded us of the beauty that can exist even in our remote frontier." This recognition clearly caught Yates unprepared. He stood awkwardly as applause surrounded him, nodding once in acknowledgement before returning his attention to Mrs. Henderson, who patted his hand with evident pride. "Furthermore," Mayor Miller added, "the council wishes to announce that sufficient funds have been raised to commission permanent improvements to our schoolhouse this spring. Mr. Porter has agreed to oversee construction of additional shelving, a proper platform for performances, and most significantly, a bell tower renovation that will make our school bell audible throughout town." This news brought another round of applause. Eliza glanced toward Yates in surprise. He had mentioned nothing about future construction projects. Their eyes met briefly across the room, and he gave a small shrug, as if to say this development was as unexpected to him as to her. As the meal resumed, Eliza found herself drawn into conversation with several mothers discussing plans for a spring picnic. She was listening to Mrs. Wilson's detailed menu suggestions when she became aware of Yates approaching. Mrs. Henderson, now apparently entrusted to Reverend Thomas's wife's care. "Miss Caldwell," he said with a polite nod to the other women, "might I speak with you for a moment?" The mothers exchanged meaningful glances but graciously stepped away, giving them privacy while remaining within propriety's bounds. "Is everything all right?" Eliza asked, noting tension in Yates' expression. "Fine," he assured her. "Just wanted to mention I'll be leaving for Cheyenne tomorrow morning, business that can't wait." The announcement surprised her. "On Christmas Day. Best time to travel," he said practically. "Roads quiet, should return before New Year's, weather permitting." Eliza felt unexpected disappointment at this news. Though they had made no specific plans, she had hoped to see him during the school holiday. "I understand," she said, keeping her tone neutral. "Business must come first." He seemed about to say more, then changed course. "Wanted to make sure the schoolhouse is secure during your break. Left extra firewood stacked in the storage room for when classes resume." "Thank you," she replied, always thinking ahead. An awkward silence fell between them, unusual given the comfortable understanding they had recently developed. Yates glanced around the crowded hall, obvious discomfort with the social gathering returning now that his musical duties were completed. "Should check on Mrs. Henderson," he said finally. "Doctor warned against overtiring her." Of course, Eliza agreed, though she sensed this was primarily an exit strategy. "Safe travels tomorrow." He nodded, holding her gaze a moment longer than necessary. "Merry Christmas, Eliza." "Merry Christmas, Yates." As he walked away, Martha promptly reappeared at Eliza's side. "What was that about?" she asked with undisguised curiosity. "He's traveling to Cheyenne tomorrow," Eliza explained. "Business matters." Martha's expression shifted to one of sudden understanding. "Christmas Day," she murmured, "of course." "What does that mean?" The older woman shook her head slightly. "Not my story to tell." Just know that his disappearance over Christmas isn't unusual, though his destination changes. Last year it was Denver, year before Santa Fe. This cryptic response raised more questions than it answered, but Martha clearly intended to say no more on the subject. Eliza was left wondering what business consistently took Yates away from Clearwater Springs each Christmas, and why Martha seemed to find this pattern meaningful. The remainder of the evening passed pleasantly, though Eliza found her thoughts repeatedly returning to Yates' unexpected announcement. When he departed early, escorting Mrs. Henderson home, he offered Eliza only a brief nod of farewell, a marked contrast to their warm exchange the previous evening. Walking home later through the quiet, snow-covered town, Eliza reflected on the contradictions that seemed to define Yates Porter. The man who had participated so fully in reviving Christmas traditions was now fleeing before the actual holiday arrived. The rancher who rarely attended social gatherings had appeared formally dressed to play music from his past. The individual who had built her a home and consistently ensured her safety now departed without explanation on a journey that clearly held significance beyond ordinary business. Despite Martha's hints, Eliza couldn't fathom what might repeatedly draw Yates away from his ranch during winter's harshest period. What she did understand with growing certainty was that her interest in solving this particular mystery went far beyond professional courtesy or neighborly concern. Somewhere between his first violin notes and tonight's formal appearance, Yates Porter had become important to her in ways that transcended their roles as rancher and schoolteacher. That realization would require careful consideration during the quiet holiday days ahead, and perhaps a decision about whether to acknowledge these feelings when he returned. For now, however, she could only wish him safe travels to Cheyenne, and hope that whatever business drew him away at Christmas might be resolved in ways that allowed him to find the peace he so evidently sought. Christmas Day passed quietly for Eliza. She attended church service in the morning, joined the Davis family for dinner as previously arranged, and spent the evening reading beside her fire. Though invitations to various homes had been plentiful, she had limited her acceptances, preferring time for reflection during her first major holiday away from family. The week between Christmas and New Year's brought a welcome respite from teaching duties, while maintaining her connection to the community through social calls and assistance with various town projects. Throughout this period, Eliza found her thoughts frequently turning to Yates and his mysterious journey. No word came from Cheyenne, nor had she truly expected any, yet his absence left a curious emptiness in a town she had only known with him as part of its landscape. On December 30th, as Eliza helped Martha organize donated books for the school's small library, she finally yielded to curiosity. "You mentioned Yates' travels each Christmas," she said carefully. "Is it truly business that takes him away?" Martha paused in her cataloging, considering her response. "Depends on your definition of business," she finally answered. "It's something he feels compelled to do, though it brings him no pleasure and likely never will." "That's rather cryptic," Eliza observed. The older woman sighed. "Eliza, I've known that boy since he appeared at our door half dead from tracking his sisters, watched him build a life despite crushing loss. I won't betray his privacy, even to you." She patted Eliza's hand gently. "If he chooses to share his Christmas journeys, that's his decision, not mine to make for him." Recognizing the justice in this position, Eliza nodded acceptance. "Of course, I apologize for pressing." "No need," Martha assured her. "Your concern comes from genuine feeling, not mere curiosity. He'll recognize that too when he's ready." This observation, with its implication of potential future confidences, gave Eliza unexpected hope. Yet as the final day of the year arrived with no sign of Yates' return, she began to worry. Winter storms could strand travelers for days, and the road from Cheyenne crossed some of Wyoming's most exposed terrain. New Year's Eve brought another community gathering, this time at the hotel's dining room, transformed for the occasion with decorations and extra tables. Most of the town attended, eager to welcome 1886 together despite the continuing absence of several families still snowbound on outlying ranches. Eliza participated in the festivities with genuine enjoyment, having formed friendships that made such gatherings pleasurable rather than merely obligatory. Yet she found herself glancing repeatedly toward the door, hoping for a familiar figure to appear. "He'll return when he can," Martha told her quietly, noticing these glances. "Weather between here and Cheyenne has been treacherous, according to the telegraph operator." "I'm just concerned as a neighbor would be," Eliza replied automatically. Martha's knowing smile suggested she wasn't fooled. Of course, dear. As midnight approached, the gathering grew more festive. Mayor Miller proposed a toast to the community's achievements in the past year and its prospects for the new one. To our growing town, he proclaimed, raising his glass. To the railroad extension that will reach us by summer, bringing new opportunities for all. To our school, now firmly established under Miss Caldwell's capable guidance. And to absent friends, who we trust will join us soon in the year to come. This last sentiment, which Eliza suspected was directed partly at Yates, brought murmurs of agreement. Glasses clinked and congratulations were exchanged as 1885 yielded to 1886. Shortly after midnight, as the celebration continued, Eliza decided to return home. The evening had been enjoyable but tiring, and school would resume in 2 days, requiring preparation. "I'll walk you," offered Thomas Davis, Martha's husband. "Not right for a lady to be out alone, even in our small town." Grateful for the escort, Eliza gathered her shawl and bade farewell to the gathering. Outside, the night was clear and bitterly cold, stars brilliant in the black sky. Their footsteps crunched in the frozen snow as they walked toward her cottage. "Been meaning to tell you," Thomas said as they walked, "you've made a real difference here. Not just with the children's education, though that's important, brought something this town needed." "That's kind of you to say," Eliza replied. "I've found more here than I expected as well." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "Place grows on you, even those who come planning to leave often find reasons to stay." He paused. "Speaking of which, noticed Yates has been around town more since you arrived. Good sign." "Mr. Porter has been very supportive of the school," Eliza said carefully. The older man chuckled. "Wasn't the school that brought him to Christmas dinner or had him wearing his Sunday suit to play violin. Boy's been hiding from life for a decade. Something's changed." Before Eliza could formulate a response that neither confirmed nor denied her role in this change, Thomas stopped abruptly, pointing ahead. "Someone's at your place," he said, his tone shifting to concern. Peering through the darkness, Eliza saw what had caught his attention. Lamplight glowed in her cottage windows, though she had left no lamps burning. "Stay here," Thomas instructed, reaching inside his coat. "Got my pistol, could be drifters breaking in." "Wait," Eliza said, placing a restraining hand on his arm. "Look at the hitching post." A familiar paint horse stood there, steam rising from its nostrils in the cold. Relief washed over her, followed immediately by confusion. Why would Yates be in her cottage at this hour? Thomas relaxed slightly but remained cautious. "Still not proper," he observed. "Man shouldn't be in an unmarried woman's home at night, even Yates." "I'm sure there's an explanation," Eliza assured him. "Perhaps he's simply ensuring the fire is adequate after his absence." Though clearly dubious, Thomas nodded. "I'll wait until you're safely inside. Any trouble, just call out." They approached the cottage together. As they reached the porch, the door opened, revealing Yates. His appearance shocked Eliza. He looked exhausted, his clothes travel-worn, his face bearing several days' growth of beard. Most concerning was the haunted expression in his eyes, suggesting emotional rather than merely physical fatigue. "Porter," Thomas acknowledged with wary formality, "wasn't expecting to find you here." Yates straightened, obviously recognizing the impropriety of his presence. "Davis," he returned evenly, "just checking Miss Caldwell's cottage after my absence. Fire needed tending before her return." The excuse was plausible, if somewhat unnecessary given the cottage's excellent insulation. Thomas seemed inclined to accept it, though his expression remained guarded. "Well, she's returned now," he pointed out. "Proper thing would be to bid her good night." Yates nodded, his gaze finally meeting Eliza's. "Happy New Year, Miss Caldwell," he said formally. "Apologies for the intrusion." "No intrusion," she assured him, concerned by his obvious exhaustion. "I'm glad to see you've returned safely. The weather has been worrisome." Something flickered across his features, gratitude perhaps for her simple welcome rather than questions or accusations. "Road from Cheyenne was difficult," he confirmed. "Just arrived an hour ago." Thomas cleared his throat pointedly. "Best be going, Porter, let the lady rest." Though clearly reluctant, Yates nodded agreement. As he moved to leave, however, Eliza noticed him sway slightly, a momentary loss of balance quickly corrected but revealing extreme fatigue. "Mr. Porter," she said decisively, "you appear exhausted. Please, sit for a moment before attempting to ride back to your ranch in darkness." Thomas frowned at this invitation, but Eliza met his gaze steadily. It would be unconscionable to send anyone back out in this cold without rest, particularly someone who has clearly traveled hard in difficult conditions. Recognizing the logic in this argument, if not entirely approving, Thomas nodded reluctantly. 15 minutes, he conceded, then I'm escorting Porter to the hotel for the night. His ranch is too far in this cold, especially in his condition. This compromise seemed acceptable to all parties. Yates stepped aside, allowing Eliza to enter her own cottage, followed by Thomas as propriety dictated. Inside, Eliza quickly assessed the situation. The fire burned steadily, suggesting Yates had indeed been tending it. A package wrapped in brown paper lay on the table, the likely reason for his presence. Please sit, she invited, gesturing to the chair nearest the fire. Both of you, I'll make coffee. Yates sank into the offered chair with evident relief, while Thomas remained standing, his posture conveying continued vigilance despite the innocuous circumstances. As Eliza busied herself with coffee preparations, Yates finally spoke. Brought something from Cheyenne, he said, nodding toward the package. Meant to leave it as a surprise, but he gestured vaguely toward Thomas, acknowledging the complication of their encounter. That's very thoughtful, Eliza replied, curious but not pressuring him to explain further while Thomas observed their interaction. The coffee quickly prepared, she offered cups to both men. Thomas accepted with a nod but remained standing, while Yates cradled his cup in hands that Eliza noticed were chapped and reddened from cold. Weather's turning again, Thomas observed, moving toward the window. Fresh snow coming by morning, I'd wager. Agreed, Yates replied, seeming grateful for neutral conversation. Barometric pressures dropping, could see significant accumulation. This discussion of weather patterns continued briefly, the two men finding common ground in practical matters despite the awkwardness of the situation. Eliza observed their interaction, noting Yates' gradual relaxation as the warmth of fire and coffee began to counter his exhaustion. When he had finished his coffee, Thomas checked his pocket watch pointedly. Time to head out, Porter. Hotel has rooms available. Though clearly reluctant, Yates nodded agreement, rising from his chair. Thank you for the coffee, he told Eliza formally, and for understanding the circumstances. Of course, she replied. I'm relieved you've returned safely. He gestured toward the package. That's for you, new geography texts. Mentioned you were needing them for the older students. The thoughtfulness of this gesture, remembering a casual comment about curriculum needs, and addressing it during his mysterious journey, touched Eliza deeply. Thank you, she said simply. They'll be put to good use. As the men prepared to depart, Yates paused at the door, seeming to struggle with something left unsaid. Finally, with a glance toward Thomas that suggested resignation to the constraints of propriety, he merely nodded farewell and stepped into the cold night. Thomas lingered briefly. I'll see he gets to the hotel, he assured Eliza. Man's exhausted beyond sense, riding in from Cheyenne in this weather. He hesitated, then added, don't think badly of him for being here. Porter's always had proper respect for ladies, despite his solitary ways. I know, Eliza replied with certainty. His character isn't in question. With a satisfied nod, Thomas followed Yates into the night, leaving Eliza alone with her thoughts and the mysterious package from Cheyenne. Unwrapping it carefully, she discovered not just the geography texts Yates had mentioned, but also several additional books. A collection of Shakespeare's works, a recent novel she had expressed interest in reading, and most surprisingly, a leather-bound journal with her initials embossed on the cover. A simple note accompanied these gifts, for expanding young minds and recording your own thoughts. YP. The personal nature of these selections, far exceeding mere professional courtesy, confirmed what Eliza had increasingly suspected. Yates Porter's interest in her extended beyond community-minded support for the local teacher. More intriguing still was the timing and circumstances of his delivery. Whatever had drawn him to Cheyenne over Christmas, he had thought of her during his journey. Whatever exhaustion plagued him upon his return, ensuring these gifts reached her had been a priority. As she prepared for bed, Eliza found herself wondering about the haunted look she had glimpsed in Yates' eyes, an expression suggesting his journey had involved more than mere purchases or business transactions. Martha's reluctance to explain his annual Christmas travels now seemed even more significant. One mystery at a time, Eliza murmured to herself as she extinguished her lamp. For now, the knowledge that Yates had returned safely and had thought of her while away was enough. The deeper mysteries of his Christmas journey could wait for another day, when trust and time might prompt him to share what clearly remained painful even after so many years. School resumed on January 2nd, with students returning eager to share holiday stories and gifts. Eliza threw herself back into teaching, implementing a new geography curriculum with the texts Yates had provided. The first week passed quickly, filled with lessons, administrative tasks, and readjustment to the school routine after the holiday break. Throughout this period, Eliza saw nothing of Yates. His absence from town was not unusual given his ranching responsibilities, yet she found herself watching for him whenever she ventured to the general store or post office. The memory of his exhausted appearance on New Year's Eve lingered, prompting concern about his well-being. On Saturday afternoon, as Eliza organized her classroom for the coming week, a knock at the schoolhouse door interrupted her work. Opening it, she found Yates standing there, hat in hand, looking considerably more rested than at their last encounter. "Mr. Porter," she greeted him, genuinely pleased by his appearance. "Please come in." He stepped inside, his gaze taking in the rearranged classroom. "Making changes," he observed. "Implementing the new geography curriculum," she explained, gesturing toward the maps now displayed prominently on the wall. "Your gifts have already proven invaluable." A hint of satisfaction crossed his features. Good, thought they might help. An awkward silence followed, both apparently uncertain how to address their New Year's Eve encounter. Finally, Eliza decided directness was best. "I was concerned about you," she admitted. "You seemed extremely fatigued when you returned from Cheyenne." He nodded slightly, accepting this observation. Journey was difficult. "Weather complicated matters." "And the purpose of your journey?" she ventured, curious whether he might volunteer what Martha had been unwilling to share. His expression closed immediately, confirming the sensitivity of the topic. "Personal business," he said simply. Recognizing the boundary, Eliza nodded acceptance. "Well, I'm glad you've recovered. The texts are wonderful, exactly what the older students needed." Visibly relieved by the change of subject, Yates moved toward the map display. "Noticed you're teaching about territories becoming states," he commented, examining the materials. "Wyoming's working toward that goal itself." "Yes, the children are quite interested in the process," Eliza replied, appreciating his engagement with curriculum matters. "Many hope to see Wyoming achieve statehood in their lifetime." "Likely will," he agreed. "Changes coming faster every year, railroad expansion, new settlements, progress mostly." "You don't sound entirely convinced of that progress," she observed. He considered this, choosing his words carefully. "Change brings opportunities and challenges both. Railroad means better markets for cattle, more settlers for community building. Also means more land disputes, pressure on resources, different ways replacing traditional ones." He shrugged slightly. "Complicated." The thoughtfulness of this assessment reinforced Eliza's growing appreciation for Yates' intelligence and perspective. Despite limited formal education, he possessed a nuanced understanding of the forces reshaping the West. "I try to prepare the children for these changes," she said. "Knowledge offers them choices about their futures, whether they remain in Wyoming or seek opportunities elsewhere." "That's why education matters," he agreed. "Options." "Choices," he paused. "Speaking of which, town council approved the school improvements I mentioned. Construction can begin when weather permits, probably March." "That's wonderful news," Eliza replied sincerely. "The additional shelving especially will help organize our growing collection of books." Yates nodded, then hesitated before continuing. "Actually came to ask something else, school-related but different, though. Some of the outlying ranch children are falling behind due to weather absences," he explained. "Davis mentioned his younger boys haven't attended since before Christmas. Same with the Carpenter twins and others." Eliza had indeed noticed this challenge. "It's concerning. The distance and weather make regular attendance impossible for some families during winter." "Been thinking about a solution," Yates continued. "My ranch is centrally located between several homesteads. Could serve as a gathering place once weekly, Saturday perhaps, for additional lessons, if you were willing to teach there occasionally." The proposal surprised and intrigued her. "You're suggesting a satellite classroom at your ranch?" He nodded. "Have space in the main house. Could arrange transportation for children from nearest homesteads, just once weekly to supplement regular schooling when they can attend." The thoughtfulness of this solution impressed Eliza. It addressed a genuine educational need, while demonstrating Yates' continued commitment to the children's learning. "It's an excellent idea," she said, "though it would mean additional work for both of us." Worth it, he replied without hesitation. These children have few enough advantages. Shouldn't lose educational opportunities due to geography and weather. His conviction reinforced what Eliza had observed consistently. Beneath Yates' reserved exterior lay passionate commitment to principles he valued, education foremost among them. When would you propose beginning? She asked, already considering logistics. Next Saturday, weather permitting, could arrange for Martha or another woman to attend as chaperone for propriety's sake. This consideration of her reputation, ensuring no impropriety could be suggested by her presence at his ranch, demonstrated characteristic thoughtfulness. I appreciate that, she acknowledged, though I suspect Martha will draw her own conclusions regardless. A hint of a smile touched his lips. Martha draws conclusions about everything. Been doing it for decades. This shared understanding of Martha's matchmaking tendencies created a moment of connection between them, acknowledgement of the undercurrents that had developed in their relationship despite neither having directly addressed them. I'll prepare supplementary lessons, Eliza said, returning to practical matters. Perhaps focused activities that build on their regular curriculum but can be completed in a single session. Sounds sensible, Yates agreed. I'll speak with the families, arrange transportation. Plans established, they moved toward the door together. Before leaving, Yates hesitated, seeming to debate an additional comment. About New Year's Eve, he finally said. Shouldn't have entered your home without permission, wasn't thinking clearly after the journey. No apology necessary, Eliza assured him. Your intention was thoughtful and Mr. Davis's presence ensured propriety. He nodded, though something troubled still lingered in his expression. People talk. Don't want anything damaging your standing here. The concern touched her. My reputation is secure, she replied confidently. The town's respect has been well established through my work. Good, he said simply. You've earned their trust. After a brief pause, he added more quietly, and mine. The simple statement, coming from someone who clearly granted trust rarely, carried significant weight. Eliza understood this represented another milestone in their evolving relationship. Thank you, she replied. That means a great deal, especially from you. Their eyes met in silent acknowledgement of deeper currents beneath this exchange. Then with a slight nod, Yates replaced his hat and departed, leaving Eliza to consider the implications of their new educational venture and the growing connection it represented. The following Saturday dawned clear but bitterly cold. Eliza had prepared thoroughly for the first supplementary lesson at Yates Ranch, creating activities that would engage children of various ages simultaneously while reinforcing key concepts from their regular curriculum. Martha, who had eagerly accepted the role of chaperone, arrived at Eliza's cottage early, bringing additional food for their midday meal. Haven't been to the Porter Ranch in years, she commented as they loaded materials into Yates' wagon, which he had sent for them as promised. Boy keeps to himself out there, though I hear from Thomas the operation's thriving. Mr. Davis mentioned Yates has expanded considerably since acquiring the initial property, Eliza replied, securing her lesson materials. Martha nodded, settling herself in the wagon. Built from nothing, that one started with 50 acres and a dozen cattle, now runs one of the largest operations in the county. Her expression softened. Did it all alone, too. Refused help even when offered, though he needed it badly those first years. The ranch hand driving them, Jim, whom Eliza recognized from previous encounters, maintained respectful silence during this conversation, though his occasional glance suggested he could add considerably to Martha's account if asked. Their journey took nearly an hour, following snow-packed trails through rolling hills. As they crested a final rise, the YP-connected ranch came into view below, far more extensive than Eliza had imagined. The main house, constructed of substantial logs with a stone chimney, stood at the center of several outbuildings arranged in practical formation. Corrals, barns, and bunkhouses suggested an operation employing numerous hands. Smoke rose from several chimneys, and activity around the buildings indicated a working Saturday despite the cold. My goodness, Martha exclaimed, place has grown considerably since I last visited. Jim nodded agreement as he guided the wagon toward the main house. Mr. Porter's added 3,000 acres past 5 years, he offered, running nearly 500 head now plus the horse breeding operation. This scale exceeded Eliza's understanding of Yates' business. She had known he was successful, but the extent of his operation and the wealth it represented surprised her. As they approached the house, Yates emerged onto the porch, accompanied by two large dogs that remained obediently at his side despite their obvious curiosity about the visitors. "Welcome to YP Connected," he greeted them, helping first Martha then Eliza from the wagon. "Children should arrive within the hour, thought you might want time to settle in first." Inside, the house revealed a similar contrast between Eliza's expectations and reality. Rather than the sparse bachelor quarters she had anticipated, she discovered a well-appointed home. The main room featured substantial furniture, bookshelves filled with volumes, and quality textiles that suggested both comfort and taste. A massive stone fireplace dominated one wall, while large windows offered views of the ranch operations and distant mountains. "This is lovely," she commented honestly, taking in the unexpected refinement of her surroundings. "Mother's influence," Yates explained briefly, "insisted on civilization even on the frontier, maintained that standard after." He trailed off, that familiar hesitation when approaching personal history. "She'd be pleased," Martha said gently, moving toward the fire. "Always had a good eye for making a house hospitable." Yates showed them to a room he had prepared for the lessons, clearly a dining area repurposed with additional tables and chairs to accommodate the expected students. Maps had been hung on walls and a small blackboard installed at one end. "Thought this would serve," he said, watching Eliza's reaction. "Made adjustments based on what I've observed at the schoolhouse." The thoughtfulness of these preparations, anticipating educational needs and arranging space accordingly, touched Eliza deeply. "It's perfect," she assured him, "better equipped than many established schools." A hint of satisfaction crossed his features before he returned to practical matters. "Coffee in the kitchen. Jim will help bring in your supplies. Let me know if anything's missing." With that, he departed to oversee final arrangements for the arriving children, leaving Eliza and Martha to organize teaching materials. "Man built you a classroom," Martha observed once they were alone, "in his home." "For the children's benefit," Eliza replied automatically. Martha's knowing expression suggested she wasn't convinced by this explanation. "Yates Porter has avoided having visitors in this house for a decade. Now he's inviting families, installing blackboards, and arranging educational gatherings." She shook her head slightly. "Don't tell me that's merely community-minded." Before Eliza could formulate a response, the sound of approaching horses announced the first student's arrival. Within the hour, 8 children from 3 families had gathered in the makeshift classroom, their excitement at this novel learning arrangement evident in their animated conversation. The lesson proceeded smoothly, with Eliza leading activities while Martha assisted younger students individually. Yates remained primarily in the background, occasionally entering to ensure all needs were met but not directly participating in the educational process. At midday, they broke for the meal Martha had prepared, supplemented generously by provisions from Yates' kitchen. The children ate enthusiastically, clearly enjoying this unusual Saturday activity that combined education with social interaction normally limited during winter months. As the meal concluded, 10-year-old Joseph Davis approached Yates with obvious curiosity. "Pa says you got the best horses in 3 counties," he stated. "Says you breed them special." Yates nodded, accepting this assessment. "Been working on improving stock, yes." "Could we see them?" Joseph asked eagerly, "before lessons start again." The request created a momentary dilemma, maintaining the educational focus while acknowledging the children's natural interest in their surroundings. Yates glanced toward Eliza, deferring to her judgment as teacher. Recognizing a valuable learning opportunity, she nodded approval. "A brief tour might be educational," she suggested. "Agricultural methods are part of our practical curriculum." This permission granted, Yates led the entire group outside, ensuring everyone was properly bundled against the cold. The children followed eagerly as he guided them toward the horse barns, explaining his breeding program in terms simplified for their understanding but never condescending. "Quality matters more than quantity," he told them, showing particular bloodlines with evident pride. "Same principle applies to cattle, crops, or anything worthwhile. Better to do something excellently than many things poorly." Eliza observed this interaction with growing appreciation. Yates demonstrated natural teaching ability, explaining complex concepts clearly, answering questions patiently, and connecting information to principles the children could apply more broadly. His usual reserve yielded to genuine enthusiasm when sharing knowledge he valued. The tour extended to include cattle operations, where Yates explained winter feeding practices and protection measures against predators. Throughout this impromptu lesson, he maintained the children's engagement through practical demonstrations and thoughtful questions that prompted them to reason through agricultural challenges. By the time they returned to the house, Eliza had gained new insight into Yates' character. His connection with the children, evident in their comfortable questions and his patient responses, revealed aspects of his personality rarely displayed in town settings. "You're a natural teacher," she told him quietly as the children settled back into formal lessons. "They responded wonderfully to your explanations." A hint of self-consciousness crossed his features, "Just practical knowledge. Nothing like your formal education." "Education takes many forms," she replied. "These children need both types: academic learning and practical wisdom. You provide the latter expertly." This observation seemed to please him, though he characteristically minimized its significance. "Ranch knowledge is just survival out here, nothing special about passing it along." The remainder of the afternoon passed quickly. As daylight began fading, parents arrived to collect their children, expressing gratitude for this educational opportunity that bridged their isolation during winter months. "Makes a real difference," Thomas Davis told Eliza as his sons gathered their materials. "Boys been restless without regular schooling. This gives structure to their learning between visits to town." Similar comments from other parents confirmed the value of this arrangement. When the final family departed, Yates, Eliza, and Martha gathered in the main room, where the fire had been built up against the deepening cold. "Successful experiment," Yates observed, pouring coffee for them. "Children engaged well." "Extremely successful," Eliza agreed. "Their retention of previous lessons was better than I expected, given the gaps in attendance." "Parents reinforcing at home," Martha suggested. "These families value education despite challenges." As they discussed specific children's progress, Eliza noticed Yates gradually relaxing, his customary vigilance yielding to genuine comfort in their company. The transformation was subtle but significant, suggesting growing trust beyond their professional relationship. When Martha excused herself briefly, Yates turned to Eliza with uncharacteristic hesitation. "Been meaning to ask," he began. That is, might you consider staying for dinner after taking Martha home, of course," he added hastily. "Cook always prepares extra on Saturdays. Ranch hands eat earlier." The invitation surprised and pleased her. "I'd like that," she replied simply. "Thank you." Something like relief crossed his features. "Good, that's good." When Martha returned, perceptive as always, she quickly assessed the situation. "You two should continue your educational planning," she announced. "Jim can take me home now, return for Eliza later." "I wouldn't want to inconvenience anyone," Eliza began, but Martha waved away her concern. "No inconvenience at all," she insisted. "Jim passes our place anyway. Besides, Thomas expects me for dinner with the grandchildren." With a pointed look at Yates, she added, "Eliza should see more of the educational facilities here, since this arrangement will continue through winter." Though transparent in her matchmaking, Martha maintained sufficient propriety in her suggestion that neither could reasonably object. Within half an hour, arrangements were made. Jim departed with Martha, promising to return later for Eliza, while Yates showed her additional features of the ranch house that might serve educational purposes, including a substantial library that occupied an entire room. "Mother's books primarily," he explained as Eliza examined the impressive collection. "Added some over the years, but her selections form the foundation." The volumes ranged from practical agricultural texts to classic literature, poetry, and history. Many showed signs of frequent reading, broken spines and dog-eared pages suggesting regular use rather than mere display. "You've read them," Eliza observed, noting markings in margins of several books. He nodded, a hint of defensiveness in his posture. "Limited formal schooling doesn't mean limited learning. Mother believed education continued throughout life." "I wasn't suggesting otherwise," she assured him quickly. "Quite the opposite. I'm impressed by the breadth of your reading." This clarification eased his tension. "Books filled evenings after parents died," he admitted. "Easier than people in some ways, more reliable." The simple statement revealed much about his development, finding solace in literature when human connections proved painful or uncertain. Eliza understood this tendency, having similarly retreated into books during difficult periods of her own youth. Yet books ultimately connect us to humanity, she observed. Even in isolation, reading bridges individual experience to universal understanding. He considered this perspective thoughtfully, never viewed it that way, interesting notion. Their conversation continued as they moved through the house, Yates gradually sharing more about the property's development and his plans for its future. The dinner that followed, served in the dining room now cleared of its classroom arrangement, proved excellent, far exceeding typical bachelor fare. "Your cook is remarkably skilled," Eliza commented as they enjoyed roast beef with vegetables from the root cellar. "Mrs. Larson comes 3 days weekly," Yates explained. "Prepares meals in advance for other days, insists ranch hands need proper nutrition, not just quantities." "She's right," Eliza agreed. "Quality nourishment affects performance in all areas, physical and mental." Their conversation flowed with surprising ease throughout the meal, covering topics from educational theory to ranching practices, literature to local politics. Yates revealed himself as both thoughtful and knowledgeable, offering perspectives shaped by practical experience yet informed by considerable reading. As they finished coffee after dinner, sitting before the fire in the main room, Eliza found herself more comfortable in Yates' company than she had been with any man previously. Their shared values regarding education, community responsibility, and personal integrity created common ground that transcended their different backgrounds. "May I ask something personal?" she ventured, sensing his unusually relaxed state might permit questions normally avoided. He tensed slightly but nodded permission. "Martha mentioned you were 16 when you came to them after the raid," she said carefully, "yet you've built all this by yourself, starting so young. How did you manage such an achievement alone?" The question hung between them, addressing his accomplishments rather than directly probing his losses, yet still touching sensitive history. For a moment, Eliza feared she had overstepped the boundaries of their evolving relationship. Finally, he spoke, his gaze fixed on the fire rather than meeting her eyes. "Wasn't entirely alone," he admitted. "Thomas Davis taught me ranching fundamentals. Reverend Thomas helped secure my first land claim when I turned 18. Mrs. Henderson provided character references when I sought bank loans." He paused. "Community contributed, though I didn't always recognize it then." "You've repaid their faith many times over," Eliza observed. "Your contributions to the town are substantial." He shook his head slightly. "Just returning what was given, nothing special about that." "Yet you consistently minimize your generosity," she pointed out gently. "The teacher's cottage, the schoolhouse repairs, today's educational gathering, all exceed mere obligation." A hint of discomfort crossed his features at this direct acknowledgement of his actions. "Education mattered to my family," he said after a pause. "Honoring that memory seems necessary." This connection between his current priorities and his family history represented the most personal revelation he had offered. Eliza recognized its significance, a deliberate lowering of guards that had long protected painful memories. "They would be proud of what you've built," she said softly. "Not just this ranch, but the way you've extended their values through your support for the children's education." Something vulnerable flickered in his expression, gratitude mixed with old grief never fully processed. Before he could respond, however, the sound of approaching hoofbeats announced Jim's return to transport Eliza home. The moment of connection broken, Yates rose quickly, practical matters replacing personal disclosure. "Should get your things," he said, moving toward the classroom where her materials remained. As they gathered her teaching supplies, the ease of their fireside conversation yielded to more formal interaction. By the time Jim arrived, Yates had fully reassumed his usual reserved demeanor. "Today was valuable," he said as he helped her into the wagon. "Children benefited significantly." "Yes," she agreed, recognizing his retreat from personal to professional assessment. "We should continue regularly while weather prevents normal attendance." He nodded, then hesitated briefly before adding, "Thank you for today. For understanding the importance." The simple gratitude contained layers of meaning beyond the educational gathering, appreciation for her comprehension of what motivated his support, for her respect for his background despite limited formal education, for the connection they had briefly shared before interruption. "Thank you for making it possible," she replied, "for these children and for the school generally." Their eyes met in the lantern light, mutual understanding passing between them. Then with a nod to Jim, Yates stepped back, allowing the wagon to depart. As they traveled through the cold night toward town, Eliza reflected on the day's revelations. Beyond the successful educational experiment, she had glimpsed more of Yates Porter's true character, his intelligence, his principles, and most significantly, his capacity for connection despite years of practiced isolation. The man who had built her cottage before her arrival, who consistently supported educational initiatives while maintaining personal distance, was gradually revealing dimensions beyond the reserved rancher the town had come to expect. What had begun as professional appreciation was evolving into something deeper: respect, understanding, and increasingly personal affection that transcended their roles as rancher and schoolteacher. This realization both excited and concerned her. Eliza had come to Wyoming seeking professional fulfillment and independence, not romantic attachment. Yet increasingly, she found herself drawn to Yates in ways that challenged her predetermined path. Complicated, she murmured, unconsciously echoing his earlier assessment of frontier changes. Jim, misinterpreting her comment, nodded agreement. Roads get treacherous this time of year, ma'am, but Mr. Porter knows these trails better than anyone, always ensures safe passage for those in his care. The observation, though referring to physical journeys, seemed equally applicable to emotional ones. Whatever path developed between them, Eliza sensed that Yates would approach it with the same careful consideration he applied to all responsibilities, ensuring safe passage while respecting her independence. That certainty provided comfort as the wagon continued through the cold night toward Clearwater Springs, where her cottage, built by his hands, awaited her return. The Saturday educational sessions at Yates Ranch quickly became an established pattern through January and February. Each week brought refinements to the arrangement. Additional educational materials appeared in the makeshift classroom, more families participated as word spread of the opportunity, and the curriculum expanded to include practical demonstrations of ranch operations that complemented academic lessons. Throughout this period, Yates maintained his characteristic balance between involvement and distance. He ensured all practical needs were met, occasionally participated in demonstrations of agricultural principles, and consistently arranged proper transportation and chaperoning. Yet he carefully avoided any appearance of impropriety in his interactions with Eliza, maintaining professional courtesy that revealed little of their fireside conversations' personal nature. In town, their public interactions remained similarly circumspect. Yates attended school board meetings, contributed to planning for spring improvements to the schoolhouse, and occasionally joined community gatherings where Eliza was present. But he never sought her exclusive company or demonstrated particular attention that might fuel gossip. Despite this public restraint, Eliza sensed subtle shifts in their connection. When their paths crossed at the general store or after church services, their conversations contained undercurrents of shared understanding beyond their words. His inquiries about her well-being carried genuine concern rather than mere politeness. Her questions about ranch operations received thoughtful, detailed responses that acknowledged her interest as legitimate rather than merely conversational. Martha, ever observant, commented on this evolution after one particularly productive Saturday session in mid-February. "You two have developed quite an educational partnership," she observed as they rode back to town. "Never seen Yates so engaged with community projects before." "The children's progress justifies his investment," Eliza replied, attempting to maintain professional focus. Martha smiled knowingly. "Certainly does. Interesting, though, how his engagement expanded once a certain schoolteacher arrived." "Martha," Eliza protested mildly, "you consistently attribute romantic motivations to what is clearly educational cooperation." "Call it what you like, dear," the older woman replied serenely. "But I've known that man since he was 16 and grieving. Whatever label you choose, his interest in you represents healing I once feared impossible." This perspective, framing their connection as evidence of Yates' emotional recovery rather than merely romantic interest, gave Eliza pause. If her presence truly contributed to his reconnection with community after years of isolation, their relationship held significance beyond personal affection. The thought lingered as February yielded to March, bringing milder weather and improved travel conditions. Regular school attendance resumed for most children, reducing the necessity for Saturday sessions at the ranch. Yet when Eliza suggested suspending the arrangement, Yates proposed continuing monthly gatherings through spring. "Children benefit from connecting classroom learning with practical applications," he pointed out. "Ranch provides that opportunity in ways town can't." The educational justification was sound, yet Eliza suspected personal motivation as well, desire to maintain their regular connection beyond school board meetings and chance encounters in town. This possibility both pleased and concerned her, as her own feelings had developed beyond professional appreciation into something more complex and potentially life-altering. In late March, as promised improvements to the schoolhouse began, Yates' presence in town increased. He personally supervised construction, working alongside hired carpenters to ensure the new bell tower would stand for generations. The day of the bell raising brought the entire town to the schoolyard. It was a heavy cast-iron bell, ordered all the way from St. Louis, intended to be heard across the valley. Yates had designed a pulley system to hoist it into the reinforced belfry. Eliza stood with the children, watching anxiously as Yates and 3 other men hauled on the ropes. The bell rose inch by inch, swaying slightly in the spring breeze. "Steady," Yates called out, his eyes fixed on the mounting bracket above. "Hold tension on the left." Then disaster struck. A sudden gust of wind caught the bell, twisting it violently. The stress was too much for one of the guide ropes, frayed by a sharp edge on the scaffolding. It snapped with a sound like a gunshot. The heavy bell swung wildly, careening toward the ladder where Thomas Davis stood. "Thomas, move!" Yates roared. He didn't just shout, he lunged. Yates threw his body weight against the swinging iron mass, shoving it away from the older man. He succeeded in diverting its path, but the recoil sent him crashing backward off the scaffolding. He hit the ground hard, landing amidst a pile of lumber. "Yates!" Eliza screamed, abandoning all dignity as she picked up her skirts and ran. She reached him before anyone else. He was lying still, his face pale, a gash on his forehead bleeding freely. "Don't move him," she commanded as the other men gathered around. "Someone fetch the doctor." Yates groaned, his eyes fluttering open. He tried to sit up but winced and fell back. "Thomas," he rasped. "He's safe," Eliza said, her hands trembling as she pressed her handkerchief to his forehead. "Because of you, now lie still, you stubborn man." He looked up at her, blinking against the blood and the sun. "You're crying," he noted, sounding confused. "Of course I'm crying," she choked out, terrified by how still he had been. "You fell 12 feet. Hard head," he murmured, trying to smile. "Runs in the family." The doctor confirmed a concussion and 2 broken ribs, ordering strict bed rest for at least a week. Since the accident had happened in town, and the doctor advised against moving him 5 miles over rough roads to the ranch immediately, Martha Davis insisted he stay in their spare room. For 3 days, Eliza went to the Davis home immediately after school dismissal. She read to him, helped Martha change his bandages, and simply sat with him while he slept. The townspeople noted her devotion, but for once the gossip wasn't malicious, it was approving. On the 4th day, Yates was sitting up in a chair by the window when she arrived. "Doctor says I can go home tomorrow," he announced. "Jim's bringing the wagon." "That's good news," Eliza said, though her heart sank slightly at the thought of him being 5 miles away again. "Eliza," he said, his voice serious, "come here." She crossed the room to stand beside his chair. He reached out and took her hand, his grip strong despite his injuries. "When I was falling," he said quietly, "I didn't think about the ranch, I didn't think about the cattle, I thought about you. I thought about how I hadn't told you." "Told me what?" "Why I really built that cottage." He pulled her gently down so she was kneeling beside his chair. "I told you it was for the community, that was true, but it was also a challenge to myself." "A challenge?" "I told myself if I built a home, a real home with care and warmth, maybe the person who came to fill it would be someone worth knowing. Someone who could look at this hard land and see the beauty in it." His thumb brushed her cheek. "I built it hoping for you, Eliza, before I even knew your name." Eliza felt the tears pricking her eyes again. "You built it perfectly," she whispered. "It's the first place I've ever truly felt I belonged." "It's too small," he said abruptly. "Excuse me." "The cottage, it's too small." A teasing light entered his eyes, chasing away the shadows. "Not enough room for a violin or a library or a family." He leaned forward, wincing slightly from his ribs but ignoring the pain. "My house has plenty of room. And it's terribly quiet without a schoolteacher correcting my grammar." "Yates Porter," she breathed, "are you proposing?" "I'm trying to," he admitted. "I'm asking if you'll move your classroom and your life 5 miles north." "I'm asking if you'll marry me." Eliza looked at the man who had built her a shelter before he knew her face, who had driven through blizzards to ensure her students learned, who had played music to heal his own heart. She realized she didn't need to think about it. She had made her choice the night he played Silent Night in the schoolhouse. Yes, she said, yes, I will. The wedding took place in June, once the school term ended and Yates' ribs had fully healed. It was held in the open air of the schoolyard under the shadow of the new bell tower. When the ceremony ended, Yates didn't just kiss his bride, he turned and pulled the rope of the new bell. The sound rang out clear and deep, echoing off the mountains, a sound of celebration, of community, and of a silence finally, joyfully broken. 3 years later, the spring thaw brought high water to Clearwater Springs, but the bridge held firm. Eliza Porter stood on the porch of the ranch house, holding a toddler on her hip while she watched a wagon approach up the long drive. "Is that the new teacher?" Yates asked, coming up the steps behind her. He was dusty from the corrals, but he stopped to kiss his wife and tickle his son's stomach. "It is," Eliza confirmed, "Miss Miller. Sarah's cousin from the east. Do you think she'll stay?" Eliza smiled, leaning back against her husband's solid warmth. She thought of the cottage in town, freshly painted and stocked with firewood and books, ready for its new occupant. "She has a good home waiting for her," Eliza said. "That makes all the difference." Yates wrapped his arms around his family, looking out over the land he had tamed, the home he had filled, and the future they were building together. "It certainly does," he agreed. "It certainly does."